dejar. Bueno, mira, señora, ay señorita, nadie sabía lo que iba a pasar. Solamente fuiste y me dejaste solito en la eternidad. Señora, ay señorita, yo sé que ahora estás lejos de mí y siempre estoy pensando lo que estás haciendo y si te sientes más feliz, y si te sientes más feliz, oye. Y espero yo que no te sientas sola y que tu vida está llena de felicidad, porque deseo que nadie tenga que sentirse ahora mismo como yo, atrapado en la oscuridad, solito en la eternidad, solito en la eternidad, oye. Trompeta,
trompeta. Óigame. ¿Qué tal, amigos? Nuevecito tomato. Tomate. We still need to fix a lot of stuff with the chat, but we're getting there.
Oye, señora, vuélvete acá. Ven acá, mi amor. Estoy perdido en la eternidad. Es la verdad, es la verdad. Oye, señora, vuélvete acá. Vuélvete, chiquita.
Oh shit, in my coffee.
Estoy perdido en la eternidad, mami. Oye, señora, vuélvete acá. Ven, 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 ven. Estoy perdido en la eternidad. Vuélvete, mi amor, ahora. Oye, señora, vuélvete acá. Oye, señorita, ven acá. Estoy perdido en la eternidad. Ahora sí, camina para allá. Saxofón con Cristian. Toca.
Súbelo, súbelo. Ay, señora,
vuélvete acá. Ay, ¿por qué me dejaste? Solamente fuiste. Ay, ven, 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 ven. Ay, ven acá, señora. Ay, ven acá, señora. Oh, ay, ven, ven, señora. Mira, yo espero yo que no te sientas sola y que tu vida está llena de felicidad, porque deseo que nadie tenga que sentirse ahora mismo como yo, atrapado en la oscuridad y solito en la eternidad. Ay, señora, vuélvete acá. Vuélvete. Ay, señora, ya se fue.
Ya se fue. All right, folks, almost ready to go. Almost ready to go. What an opinion we got from our good friend Judge Breyer. First of his name. It's a banger. Bow, 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 bada, bow, bow. Do-do-do-do. Bada, bow. Yeah, I know the fucking chats are messy right now. We're gonna fix it. It's an eyesore right now. We'll get it working, all right? Bow, bada, ba, beep, boop, 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 ba, 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 da, ba, da, ba. Lee Bitterman is in my new video. You should like it, please. We have a second or two. Wow, it worked. We got both chats. We're complying. Hell yeah. And we got this banger opinion to go through. Oh my God, you guys are gonna love it. Some good lines, some tasty lines. What's up, legal bruv? How you going? Just look at those first two sentences. Oh! Muchos hornos. Muchos hornos. Oh, I definitely want to talk about Birthright with someone. Anybody. Kafka? Hell yeah. It's over. It's over. The music is over. You know what? Actually, I can message someone. We'll let it play out. I should be messaging someone real quick. Ahora para muchos hornos. Check my email. Send a message. When they make the coffee just right. Oh shit. I forgot to message you. One more message. Climax. Giggity. What up, everybody? Welcome to another wonderful Friday. Just kidding. I like fucking with your guys' heads sometimes. Yesterday I said it's Monday. Today I said it's Friday. The funny thing is, I actually thought yesterday was Wednesday. And I thought I needed to be going on a train yesterday. On a Wednesday. But yesterday was, of course, Tuesday. But the joke that I said yesterday was, oh, happy Monday, everybody. But the joke was on me because it's actually Tuesday. But I thought it was Wednesday. But I didn't want you guys to, like, not catch that slip up. How you all doing? How you all doing? Does it feel cheery? Oh, I feel cheery. I feel cheery. I haven't seen the Nick Fuentes interview. Yesterday, I don't know if you guys could tell in the Counterpoints conversation, I had a horrible headache. I was feeling horrible. And he was just saying stuff, and I was like, oh, fuck, I don't even know what I'm talking about. So I said anything stupid yesterday. Was it yesterday? Fuck. I felt sick. I did not feel good. But today, I feel amazing. I took an ibuprofen, Advil, drank a bunch of these Powerades, and then I woke up at like 6 a.m. Amazing. Right? Did a bunch of my stuff, and you know what I did then? I played some StarCraft 2 campaign. Crazy, huh? I went achievement hunting because it was one thing I could like just do. It was just something I could do. You guys don't know that I have many different multitudes of layers. But yeah, I game. Sometimes I game. It's always when I just start, I get all these messages and I get very stressed. Electrolytes are important. What's StarCraft? It's a game. what's going on with the National Guard. But how can we talk about StarCraft when shit's happening in our country? First thing to notice, as I take the temperature of the MAGA movement and the government shit, it seems like everyone is kind of, and this is good for us. I think it's good. Or it's not as bad as it could be. You got to always put in the little disclaimers. Well, some shit could go off. Who knows what the fuck is happening? But it feels like everyone is treading water and kind of, you ever in that zone of like twilight employment, or you're ever in that zone of like, it's almost break before you're it's not quite your finals, but it's like before an awkward break. You know what I'm talking about? That's kind of what it feels like. Everyone in there is like kind of going through the motions a little bit already in some things, on some stuff. Obviously, they have people embedded in these agencies that are constantly trying, like, thinking to themselves, what is like the worst possible thing that we could do on an issue? Recently, it was student loans. Congratulations. How many of you guys were on the SAVE plan? Any student loan havers on the SAVE plan? I mean, this administration fucking hates you if you have student loans. Biden, credit where it's due. And I will say this to the Vanguard. I will say this to anybody. I think Biden did an honorable job on student loans. He really was trying to fulfill his promise and do right by the borrowers who trusted him. And he did his best. He absolutely did his best. And you know what? We couldn't perform for the Democrats. And the country kind of said, screw you to all your student loan borrowers. Now, I know some of you are like, well, fuck it, you took out a loan, whatever. But I know there are many out there who have like student loans and actually appreciate what Biden was doing there. And it's not even just like the whole pay it back thing. Like, the interest on some of these loans is like insane. And I think they just like messed up the grad plus loans too. So there is definitely bad stuff happening. And every day they wake up and say, let's take the maximally like ghoulish position on anything, on everything. But beyond that, it kind of feels like the air is a little disquiet and that people are waiting for their opportunities for what happens next. I really get that feeling. I get that sense. We're still cooked. I mean, we are gonna be cooked for the next rest of your life on this administration. It really was an important election, guys. I don't want to tell you. 2024, very pivotal. This will be something that we're dealing with for the rest of our lives. And I know it's only less than a year into the administration, but you better expect Alito and Thomas, probably both of them, to retire. So we're going to have to deal with what Josiah from Pondering Politics like to say, a Donald Trump supermajority on the Supreme Court. But before we do that, before we unpack that, I need you to like, subscribe. Guys, like the new video. It's easy to do. You leave it on the fucking stream to the side. It doesn't hurt you. You know, I like these Avi conversations, and I know some of you, it's not as like bombastic as some of the other debates. But, you know, just give it a like, why don't you? Because I want to have Avi back. We want to finish the conversation, okay? I am interested if Kafka's out there at some point talking about birthright citizenship. If he can wait, I would prefer that, just so we can go over this opinion a little bit. I'm not inclined to read the entire thing. I'm just gonna like go to different sections. We'll read probably a few pages here and there of it, because there's some bangers in here, and you need to understand the way Breyer's laying it out. He's like so comprehensive about what's happening with the National Guard stuff. And I really appreciate it because he takes stock and he sees the bigger picture. One thing that I hate about some judges is it's always important to be able to focus your inquiry and to kind of formalize a specific point of legal inquiry. But losing the forest for the trees is a big issue, I sometimes feel. That, I think, is crucially being missed in some of these executive power decisions that we've complained so much about, some of the removal decisions, etc. Avi is right now aggressively arguing to all the commentators on the VOD, which is his right, which is his want to do, you know? Listen, today I woke up and sometimes you just got to get into those replies, you know? Sometimes you just got to get into those replies and you got to just start a little flame war. Why don't you? But But where was I? Yeah, forest for the trees. Breyer, I think this guy should have been on the Ninth Circuit. I can't believe some of the clowns we have on the Ninth Circuit instead of Breyer. I mean, this guy gets it. And I think he senses the untenability of a previous Ninth Circuit ruling on a TRO, which it's called, I think it's called Trump versus Newsom or U.S. versus Newsom. I forget what it's called. It's the Newsom decision. That case is just hot garbage. And you can start to see the issues with it. But even taking the Newsom opinion, which he has to take as the law of the circuit, which it is currently, they're in potential litigation to address it, because the test is fucking stupid, in my opinion, and not at all in keeping with what the rule is or ought to be, in my opinion. But there's also humility here, which is you'll see where Breyer actually looks at a different opinion out of Illinois and says, this was an assumption I had, and I actually might be wrong, and I've looked at additional evidence. And so in addition to having like the bigger picture of, in context of the standard the Ninth Circuit had, and giving the full story of the National Guard from a factual perspective, he is also humble in the sense that there was a particular legal issue, some of you might know it, that everyone kind of assumed in interpreting the statute of federalization, that a judge, a kind of like a more originalist Trump appointed, I think, judge or a conservative judge, actually did the analysis on this point of law and brought this all to everyone's attention. And he's totally humble in how he addresses what he thinks is now an error. And I think it's very sophisticated the way he handles it. And so I want to show you all this. And it's got a bunch of bangers in the opinion itself, which I wanted to show to you all. He's in disagreements right now. Okay. What is the proper approach here? I think I talked to Kafka first. Because he might be time limited. And so I'd rather talk to Kafka first, given that he might be time limited. And I can come to this opinion right after. So I think that's what I'll do. I don't want to be in the uncomfortable position where like I waste all this time in the opinion and then he's waiting the whole time and he has to go or something. So I'll start with Kafka. I think he wants to talk about birthright citizenship. And so do I. I always want to talk about this. So let's bring him in. No, this is not the judge. This is not Judge Breyer is not coming on to talk to me. This is Judge Kafka. I mean, Kafka Esquire. Yo, what up, Kafka? How you doing?
Oh, hey, doing good. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming on.
I decided to prioritize you because you might have like a hard out. So I want to make sure that we use you. You wanted to talk about birthright citizenship.
Yeah, I was looking over the case the other day, and I was just thinking about it, and I wanted to kind of get your perspective on the case because I think you have a good view on these things, and I think you're a little bit better constitutionally than I am. But have you seen any of the information about the birthright citizenship case that's coming up on the docket in this? I believe it's in the spring.
Yeah, I read the brief against the cert petition, and I read some of the petition for cert. It's all the same bullshit that they always bring up. So I don't claim to have a very profound understanding of the particular briefing of the case. I know enough about the doctrine and the history of the argument here, and I took a glance at the petition for cert, and then I spent a decent amount of time on the memorandum against cert petition. And I can talk a little bit about the decision to grant cert too, which I don't think is people shouldn't take that as a horrible sign. I don't think.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're in a roughly the same area, but I think I'm with you on that this isn't the worst. This isn't like, oh, they're signaling that they're going to grant everything.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
I've seen discussions around it. So for everybody listening, the Supreme Court is going to be reviewing a case. It's going to be Trump v. Barbara, which is similar to Trump v. Casa earlier this year regarding the executive order signed in January that eliminates birthright citizenship in America. In the previous case, the Supreme Court said that nationwide injunctions basically weren't a thing anymore, and they said the right way to do it would have been through a class action. So the same day the opinion came out, the ACLU did a class action for all born and unborn children in the United States that would be affected by the EO. Injunction was granted, and now we're fighting over whether or not that's fair.
Specifically, so the decision he was referring to, that dealt with the power of the judiciary under the Judiciary Act of 1789 and the extent to which their equitable powers included these so-called universal injunctions. I disagreed very strongly with that decision, but that wasn't dealing with the merits as you suggested. And the very next thing that happened was there was litigation on the class certification issue. Basically, there's a bunch of requirements under Rule 23 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure about how you can have a class, the requirements, different types of classes, and the ACLU. I mean, they had these briefs practically ready to go in case that was the ruling, and they did. And the certified classes, I think, relate to either preliminarily certified or whatever, the two classes that are affected by Trump's order, which I think specifically are the children of people here on a not like permanent visa and people with no authorization at all, who also don't have fathers who are U.S. citizens. There's some specificity about how it's defined, but the executive order that Trump issued is specified in for like two groups of people essentially who are not given birthright citizenship. An interesting point, and I'll let you get to your the point you want to talk about though, is their proposed classes of people that the Trump administration identified. Those aren't like the full scope people they potentially could target if their legal argument went through. So it's just a matter of policy, I suppose, that they chose only to go after the groups they did, maybe because it would be more palatable. But don't confuse the extent of their argument with actually the classes that they're affecting by the executive order. But go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and also the extent of the classes they would enforce it against. To me, if they get it, I have no doubt if they get any kind of nod from the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court is okay with it, they're going to enforce it to the fullest extent they possibly can. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see, Trump saying, well, even though this person's been alive for 30 years and they're here in America, right, for these reasons, we have the right to question whether or not their birthright citizenship is legitimate because the Supreme Court said this, right? I mean, they've already come out and openly said on TV that we want to support a Supreme Court case that they very obviously lost, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, I don't think that they would. I don't think that they would necessarily stop there because even as recently as like last week, they were talking about denaturalization, which you can imagine those things starting to like. You want to talk about selective enforcement of a federal law? They would absolutely selectively enforce this provision of denaturalization. And so I think that were they to get a favorable ruling here or some kind of bullshit, I've seen some theory crafting about how they could try to bullshit like ally the issue here. If they decided to do that, it could definitely affect more people than what's specified by the executive order. For those of you who are not familiar, this is the executive order. It was issued on like the very first day of the administration. They had this shit ready to go, Project 2205 and all that. And these are the two classes of people. It does not extend to persons born in the United States, that's territorial, when that person's mother was unlawfully present and the father wasn't a U.S. citizen or LPR, that's green card holder, or when that person's mother was lawful but temporary. And this includes basically anyone who's here on visa waiver, anyone who's here student work, tourist, all like the normal temporary visas. So these are the two classes of people whose mothers, if your father is ever a green card holder or a citizen, doesn't apply to you. But if your mother is unlawfully present or temporary and your father isn't one of those two things, you're in one of the two classes.
Right. And it's interesting because I want to pick your brain. Do you think that if the legislature had passed a law that basically said the same thing, that said, if you're here temporarily or you're here illegally, the birthright citizenship doesn't apply, do you think that would also be able to be struck down as unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment?
Of course.
Okay.
I mean, just to make sure people understand why, the whole point, or there were many points to passing the 14th Amendment, and it's actually very confusing. I was spamming someone in my Twitter replies who really didn't understand the debate that was happening in the Congress at the time. It's a little dangerous to go wade into those discussions without context because a lot of the debates that are happening there, even as you read them, they're a little incoherent and contradictory. And so you can pick out sentences where different people are saying different things. They like they're almost like explicitly talking past each other at various different parts in the debate. But one thing that everyone thought that they were doing, first of all, was giving citizenship to the freed slaves. and also settling this question as a matter of constitutional provision such that future statutes couldn't contradict it. Now, obviously, Congress, if it wants to, can go beyond this, and they can obviously like give additional rules of naturalization beyond the territorial rule, and they have, right? They've extended this to American Indians, where it wasn't interpreted to apply to them initially, and that's because of reasons that we can get into. They've extended it to certain categories. They've always had these kinds of categories, but they've adjusted them here and there for blood, citizenship by blood. And so they could adjust those, but they can't pass a statute that contradicts what the 14th Amendment says. That was one of the whole points, was to prevent this from being a live issue and to settle it once and for all.
Right. And that was, and that's kind of the interesting thing to me, is where it's like I think if we're talking about choosing who to extend citizenship to, if we're not looking at the Constitution, the obvious body to do so is the legislature. And even the legislature could not write something that does what this executive order does. So how can we possibly allow a president to just do this with just by signing executive order? Just right. To me, it's a categorically just like weaker thing that there shouldn't even really be a question about it in my mind.
Well, it all turns on the. Oh, I see what you're saying. So like, how can Trump affect the naturalization rules, even assuming his interpretation of this constitutional provision is correct? How can he expand or retract what's already, what the rules are? I would just say, think of their argument, right? From their perspective, all they're doing is enforcing the Constitution as they understand it. This is from their perspective, right? In their mind, formalistically, how the argument goes is, we're not changing anything. We're interpreting it correctly for the first time. And given that there are individuals here who, as properly understood, are not citizens under the 14th Amendment, and keep in mind also there's a analog federal statute that I think either exactly or close to exactly mirrors this language. They're just going to argue statutorily that doesn't grant citizenship either, that it should be interpreted to the same extent as the 14th Amendment. And so the statutory argument is going to rise and fall on the constitutional argument in their mind. And then ultimately, right, the end effects of that is going to be, well, whatever it happens to be in a particular case, right? So if in a particular case, an individual is not granted birthright citizenship, but there's another plausible claim of relief, or they're here legally through some other means, I don't fucking know how, then potentially they wouldn't have the any negative impact from this, other than, I guess, losing citizenship or whatever. That would obviously be a negative impact. But all I'm trying to say is, their whole interpretation is, we don't need to pass a new law. We don't need to, this doesn't need to be a statutory matter, because the executive already has the power to enforce immigration. We're just proposing to enforce it against people who have been incorrectly labeled as citizens.
Right.
You know?
Right. No, very true. That's a good way to explain it. I think it's interesting too, though, that whenever you look at their arguments, there's this kind of like, to me, I don't think they've done a good job of identifying the harm of like these people becoming citizens, right? And the reason I bring that up is because whenever you look at the arguments that were made in Trump v. Casa earlier this year, the states were made oral arguments that were very strong about how this is going to cost a ton of money, cause a lot of bureaucratic bloat, cause a lot of issues for regulatory bodies to have all these stateless people in America, how we're going to be able to take...
Yeah, but when has that ever stopped? That's a good point. So, so the Kavanaugh points were like, what the fuck are you supposed to do with hospitals and all these documents? Are like, are doctors supposed to make these decisions, immigration decisions when people are born, and so the logistics problems? But my question for you is like, well, who cares? I mean, when has that ever stopped them? When has good policy ever been the thing that motivates the administration?
Well, it motivates them whenever it comes to tariffs, and they say, "Well, look, we can't undo these tariffs." Well, they say we can't undo the tariffs. We can't undo them, Pisco, because if we do, it'll be just too much money. It'll be too confusing, too difficult. We should just keep the tariffs because we're funding people's too difficult.
No, but what I mean is like, yeah, but they're wrong about that, right? So yeah, I understand. Like, but what they'll say is the policy advantages of getting rid of these illegals outweighs it, right? So yeah, I understand that there's good policy reasons and logistical reasons why we should ignore it, and even Kavanaugh, et cetera, alluded to it. Maybe because that could be relevant for some of the the burden analysis for purposes of like injunctions or whatever the relief is that's being sought here. But I just don't see how that is relevant to what Trump and friends do. They're not going to be convinced on good policy
No,
grounds.
I don't think I don't think that this is a situation where I'm like going to Trump and pleading with him on those grounds. But I do think that I think there's merit in us making sure that we are shored up on that side, just because I think
Sure.
the hand wringing, the very clearly showing that this is like basically evil and done just to harm people is an important point to make. But I don't want us to make that to be the only point we make, because I think that makes it very easy for people to just kind of roll their eyes, move on, say, okay, these guys have TDS or whatever. On the other hand, it's like, okay, well, if you don't want to hear,
I think this is a great point.
I can talk utility, right?
Yeah.
All day.
I think this is a great point, and it's one of my shortcomings. The problem is I think the legal arguments are they're so strong and easy for me to do in different situations, and I feel like it gets people to do the biggest concessions in, like, for example, my Tim Pool conversations is to get them to admit that they don't care what the law says. They're just going to do what they're going to do. And so very often I will go down the constitutional legal process argument as opposed to the policy argument. So take, for example, the strikes on the drug boats, right? I say it's murder. It's fucking this. And I don't really want to wade into the kind of like, well, if it were legal, if it were not murder, ought we do it? Right? Like, suppose it didn't violate due process or didn't violate the rules of war or wasn't murder. Would you be okay with this kind of action as a way to combat drug? But the thing is, like, for me, at least on that front, that requires like an actual wading in on, well, what is the most effective way to combat drug scourge? Should it be fucking legal? Will it deter people? If it were legal, like, would I have a problem with it? So, like, to me, I can short circuit all that by saying, no, we need to obey the rules of war and law. This is barbaric and this is fucking shitty, and we should resolve it the way we resolve most crime. And in America, most people's priors are that we shouldn't punish with death the people who do even horrible social things. That there's some other notion of culpability that we appeal to, but it's a lot more complicated. On this specifically, like, so now argue in some sense, right? The benefits of having birthright citizenship or the practical benefit, utilitarian ends, are in some sense process oriented too. Like, having birthright citizenship prevents the government from being arbitrary or weird about citizenship rules. It cements them. It gives final. So this is not up for debate anymore. And prevents us from getting into like another fucking war. Remember, the Civil War partly was about who's part of the club, who's a citizen. After Dred Scott said they're not citizens anymore. Black people aren't citizens. So for me, it's hard to disentangle my policy argument. Maybe I would point to the consequences that you're talking about, and maybe that's a good thing to look at, is like, look at what we would be doing. We'd be spending billions and billions of dollars going through everyone's papers on the whims of ICE officers, more detentions, all for what when we're struggling with employment now and like struggling with prices. Is this a good idea? Maybe that's the right approach, and I appreciate that, because sometimes I feel that's lacking in my arguments.
Well, and I definitely will default to like the legal process arguments, but I have, in my personal life off stream, I do have MAGA people in my life, and that's where I've seen the most kind of bridge building, de-escalation conversations that I've had. Like, for me, I've really worked on it, and when I sit down with them, I can get them to agree to a lot. I can get them to critique the administration. I can get them to talk about policies they like and don't like. Right? And I have to use specific language to make sure I don't, set off, their buzzword trigger alarms and memes and stuff like that. But I think the whenever I come from the perspective of that policy thing, it can be just look, we don't need to talk about morality here, right? Like, I just don't know if I was driving down the street and a cop thought that he saw drugs in my car and he took out a gun and just shot me right there. I don't think I'd agree with that. I don't think that's okay for a cop to do. Yeah, and most people on the right agree with that. And then for me to extrapolate it out, I'm at least starting on a ground with like, okay, this is your perspective. It's not just that you hate Donald Trump. It's that you think that the use of force by the government should be restrained. And so now, okay, I can get some people with me whenever I'm talking about it that way.
Yeah, maybe that's just like something I should that's some software I should install in my fucking brain, because I do think that sometimes I get a little black pill that these guys will bite the most insane bullets. So, for example, mass deportation, you put it in terms of money, and they don't give a fuck. They'll just say, I don't care if it costs all the budget. I just want them the fuck out of here. And part of that intuition, because oftentimes people will reject that it has anything to do with like social or with racial or ethnic provincialism or anything like that. They'll just say they all need to go out because they broke the rules. And so and then it just gets back to the legal argument anyway. So I find that these people, when I bring up the policy argument, like, don't you think at a time when our budget is fucking insane that the mere expense, like I can understand securing the border or whatever, but to operate an internal police force, you would need with some an amazing scope to go after millions and millions of people to conduct this like huge process. It's just not worth all the expense. It's going to incur tons of costs in terms of liberties, in terms of fiscal costs, obviously in terms of economic effects on different markets and stuff, and false arrests and false imprisonments and paying the guards, paying the bureaucrats. I say all that shit, and maybe I'm just blackpilled or maybe I'm talking to the wrong people. They're like, I don't give a fuck. They need to go. And that either is based in some kind of ethnic or racial preference that I can't, it's hard for me to bridge that, or it's based again on the law, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, like that to me is go for it.
That is difficult. And also, to be fair, I'm talking to people that I love and care about, which it makes it a lot easier for me to have like a respectful conversation with them. Because like whenever I talk to MAGA people on the internet, like, yeah, it's really easy for me to be like, actually, fuck this person. I don't give a fuck. But there is this kind of like, this thing where like whenever I'm going in to talk to them, if I can get them to agree, like, okay, if I was running a business and I wanted to prevent fraud in that business, there's a point at which it would cost more money for me to prevent fraud than than the fraud is costing me. You would agree with that, right?
Oh, yeah.
People with like certain sophistication
on the means testing thing, yeah.
Right. And most people with any sophistication would agree with you. And if you can start there and then start talking about like Social Security fraud or food stamps fraud or things like that, you can kind of start having that conversation, right? And that's kind of the thing is like, if I talk to them and I say, well, you can agree with that, right? And they say, I don't care. I would spend any money because I wouldn't accept any fraud in my business. Then I can go, okay, I don't need to have that conversation with them. I already know their position. And
they'll bite that bullet. No, I think it's very useful what you're saying because I will get so myopically focused on the legal parts of it. And sometimes I think it's justified when people will say, well, it's just because they broke the rules. But in terms of getting them to bite bombs, when you say something like that, well, I don't care how expensive it is. I will literally kick them out at any price. And then you just start doing the one-way ratchet, like even if it would lead to the destruction of their fiscal health entirely, and then you would go bankrupt and everyone in your life. So the insane bites that people would bite, like for purposes of policy or whatever, or economic reasons that you're bringing up, sometimes can appear to be more insane than some of the bites that I think I'm successfully getting, which are like, so you would break the law knowingly. You know, it is, I think, an effective thing to put out there, but like it's a little one note because I just keep repeating it. So I think these are great points.
I remember you being on Tim Pool and I can't remember the context of it. You asked something where you essentially said, so you're okay breaking the Constitution to get what you want. And Tim was like, yeah. And it's like, okay, well then like you've forfeited the entire argument as far as being like a reasonable actor within the American political system. You were just as radical as any communist that you claim to hate because you're saying you want to just undo the entire system just so you can get what you want, right? Which, okay, that's your position. Like very clearly, I'm not going to argue you down from that if you're going to take that extreme of a stance. But I do think there are a lot of people that are in between there. I know that you interact with a lot of people that have very large personalities online that are very bought into that kind of extreme rhetoric.
Oh yeah.
So that's something that I don't interact with as much. But on that though, I think that it's an area where whenever I see online like left debaters or people interacting with people on the right and they run into that I don't know anything about that situation, that is another area that like really frustrates me, where it's like people are on our side, I think, are running to substance too quickly. We're running to, what do you think about what just happened? What do you think about this that happened right here? And it gives them the opening of, I don't know about that. Whenever they went up to Speaker Johnson and they were like, what do you think about Trump pardoning that the president of Honduras who smuggled all the drugs, right?
The drug trafficking.
I would have, if I was that reporter, I would have said, Speaker Johnson, do you think it's okay for a president to pardon drug dealers? That's the question I would have asked. I would, and because he can know an answer to that one. He doesn't need to know current events to know the answer. And if he says no, it's not okay, I'd say, great. What do you think about Trump pardoning the Honduran president? And then he goes, well, I don't know anything about that. And you say, well, the Honduran president was convicted of smuggling drugs or whatever. And he received a pardon from Trump this morning. So do you think it's okay because he was a drug dealer that Trump pardoned him, right? I think taking that breath to ask that prior question to establish that really undercuts the I don't know. And I really wish people would do that more. And that's kind of like within the same realm. But I know it's hard. It's hard to even
and because they don't really pay a price for it, right? Like Trump doesn't pay a price for inconsistent answers or bullshit, insane answers. Did you see his recent Truth Social about like all the doctors that are watching his like it's insane this that like he doesn't really get held to account for inconsistent or insane positions. Mike Johnson, no one really looks to him, and the only people who care about Mike Johnson's inconsistencies or lapses in convenient lapses in knowledge about like world news are liberals, right? Or like left-wing people who are watching the Bulwark and watching all this shit. So in some sense, I'm a little doomer pilled about that. But in the context of a conversation you're having with a person, I can understand why having those kind of more general abstract questions that establish kind of a baseline can be helpful. It's often useful to bring this up in the context of corruption too, where I'll often be like, do you think it's a problem that like we have people who are conflicted in these positions making decisions? Like, you remember Hunter Biden and Burisma, and they'll buy into the principle, and then like I'll hit them with well, what about Qatar and what about all these other places? No, I hear your point here. I do think that's often a failing of mine. I do want to say though that like it really is not intuitive what appeals to the common person sometimes, and I guess I don't know exactly the best way to approach different of these conversations, but maybe you have a better idea.
I think that in that regard, I am woefully underexperienced. And to be fair, I think that a lot of the owning that you get to do whenever you own these, I think you do a great job of rubbing their noses in it and stuff. And I think that does play really well. I don't know how much my approach would play. It's just for me, I know personally that's something where it's like, I see that and I wonder how it would go. I do actually have a hard out here in a few minutes, but I wanted to ask one thing before I do go. Did you catch the oral argument on Slaughter at all?
I mean that shit's done, dude. I mean, like it's so ridiculous. Man. We talked about this, and I actually have the case up right here, that there just isn't a good way to distinguish the Federal Reserve except for like shit that doesn't matter.
Right.
And this is, I think, one of the best examples of the Supreme Court with like results-oriented jurisprudence. Like the test, as far as we can see it from Wilcox, and I don't know what the fuck they're going to write in this Slaughter case. For those of you guys who don't know, I think Slaughter is FTC, so it's directly on point for Humphrey's Executor, the case we've been talking about, of establishing the constitutionality of certain protections for removal in some cases from members of certain agencies. The court is going to come up with some sui generis rule for the Federal Reserve that doesn't make any sense. And yeah, like I'm kind of like over a little. Maybe I'll listen to the oral argument sometimes, but hearing them try to sell this fucking position as required by the Constitution is nauseating to me. It really makes me. A lawyer that I really respect one time told me, Pisco. He didn't say Pisco. He said my name. This is just a game we all play for money. And I was like, at the time I was a little bit more idealistic, and I nodded along. I was like, what? But like. No one makes me more of a realist than the Supreme Court. I don't want it to be that way. I want there to be faith that there's at least some intelligible principle, some consistent set of principles, that it's not just a game being played for money or for partisan favor. But more and more, the people who blackpill you, who make you realist pilled, are the Supreme Court. And we all have to be realists now. There's no pretense anymore. After Trump versus United States, after the Anderson case, and after overturning Chevron, all these other different cases, we all have to be realists, because what's motivating the court are not consistent set of principles. They'll find some bullshit. The Federal Reserve was enacted on a Tuesday, not a Wednesday, and our ruling only affects things that are enacted on Wednesdays, not Tuesdays. Therefore, Federal Reserve. I mean, that is a way to distinguish it, but it's not one that's premised on any like good faith, consistent constitutional principle. And so I get kind of nauseated sometimes when I hear them on their high horse too, talking down to these litigants sometimes who know the briefs better than they do.
Exactly. I think that was one of the best examples of a like true struggle session of just like, holy shit, there can be zero question about where the Supreme Court is at. Not that there was before, but this is just like, it's one of those things where it's like, what a nail in the fucking coffin to any argument that this court has any integrity or ability to actually analyze what they're looking for at other than their own partisan views. It is very frustrating, and is one of the I did have to shut it off after a certain point where I was like, okay, I get it. I'm I'm just going to make myself angry and not
Yeah,
work today. So
I kind of felt that way. And I listened to the entire Anderson oral argument. This is the Section 3 case. And to see all of them, including and especially the liberal justices, just not get it and just talk about nonsense. I'm just like, you guys know how to be smart. You are smart. Like, you are very intelligent people, all of you. Yes, even including Kavanaugh, even including all these people. They're all very smart people. So I think better of your intelligence, such that you should be able to be more convincing when you say all this bullshit. And the stuff about the independent agencies. I mean, talk about a theory that just has no there's just no basis for it. There's no reason for this shit, and it's a creation of Roberts, and he'll go down in history as one of the worst chiefs we've ever had. He's totally lost control of this court, and the Supreme Court's not even doing a good job guiding the lower courts. They're like talking down to lower courts all the time in their shadow docket, talking all kinds of shit, but they fail to give like basic accounting for their rulings, such that people can or courts can be put on notice for what matters. In the Texas case, oh my God, the Texas redistricting case, that is like
unacceptable,
politicized Supreme Court that I have never seen before. The level of shamelessness of the majority opinion there, so depraved. I mean, it was crazy, but it's what I come to expect.
I feel embarrassed that I was like somehow optimistic that they wouldn't go that far. That this come on, that level of partisanship, that is just that would be too far. It'd be too embarrassing. It'd be too shameful to do something like that. And they just both feet jumped right in like, hell yes we will. And it's just like, oh my God, seriously guys? Like, I'm with you, where it's like and they couldn't even they can't even give me the pretext that like, okay, here's this argument that I don't agree with, but they haven't. Here's the argument, at least. No, there's nothing. It's all paper. There's literally nothing there.
So like, and before you go though, I just want to say one thing on that. You can always see what the court is doing when it has these like little lines. Like this Federal Reserve one is a perfect example of it. They're trying to preempt. They're trying to affect politics. They're trying to preempt. They're thinking about what the coverage is going to be, and in some sense, these opinions are made for the public, so it should have the public in mind in some sense. Like, these are public-facing opinions, and the whole point of it is to be read and understood. But when it's so nakedly, like, you're trying to win the argument on Twitter, or you're trying to, like, calm the markets, or you're trying to send a signal to the executive branch, or in the case of this Texas case, right, where they signal for California, in the opinion, like, presumably, or it might have been in the concurrence, or I think it was in the concurrence of the three concurring members in the Texas decision. They're like, presumably the California map as well, to be like, hey, look, we're fair. We're going to keep California and we're going to keep Texas. When the California map is not before you yet. The California map is based on a different set of facts. So you're now prejudging the California map. Like, listen, I think it's a fucking stupid argument. The California map is racially gerrymandered. Keep in mind, the DOJ sued California, didn't sue Texas, even though Texas explicitly premised it based on race, and California explicitly did not.
Texas case facts.
It is crazy, the facts there.
Even Ken Paxton, a gigantic idiot, was like, guys, just say it's not for this reason.
And it was weird when because I didn't quite get it when I saw that letter from Paxton, because I saw it in real time. For those who don't know, like, Abbott announced that they were doing this in response to the DOJ letter that said these are racially gerrymandered. And Paxton, of all people, who has survived an impeachment and now is going to try to run for senator in Texas, he's like, no, these districts are not illegal. Like, presaging and thinking about, well, we can't admit that this is illegal and we can't do it for this reason. If you guys want to gerrymander, you have to be political. And so, Paxton saw it. That's what you're referencing. But it turns out it didn't matter. Turns out it didn't fucking matter. The facts were so strong. And now it seems like, well, when are you going to be able to show a racial gerrymander? I just like don't know what kind of facts you would need. This is what you would need. You would need a Democrat saying we're trying to help black people. When it's Republicans saying, hey, we're trying to help Hispanics and black people, that's okay. But when it's a Democrat saying we want to help Hispanics and black people, that's a racial gerrymander. That's what it would take. It's so nakedly partisan. And for the court, or at least the concurring justices, to prejudge the California, I mean, like, whatever. I don't think that it's racially gerrymandered in California, but you haven't seen the record in that case yet, right? Like, exactly. You're prejudging it in a concurrence. You should. So it's so nakedly political.
Yeah, it's so improper. Like, even like think about whenever they get interviewed in the Senate, they're like, can you comment on this? I haven't seen that case. I'm not going to comment on that case. Yet here, one of the justices, they're like, hey, guys, just so you know. Yeah. I do have to go.
All right. Hey.
I got to go. Let me do a real quick shout out. I'm going to be on a podcast Friday called the Gilmore and Gondim podcast. I don't know where the fuck to find it, but they asked me to come on. Whatever.
Gondim?
They asked me to shout it out. Yeah, Gondim and Gilmore. They have a podcast. They asked me to come on.
Like Gondim, who used to be, he might still be. I don't know actually the status of his band. Member of my server, Gondim.
I believe that's the same one. Yeah.
Oh shit. All right, sick.
Are you gonna warn me? Are you gonna warn me about him? Should I know things?
I actually don't. Gondim is like a bit of a mystery to me sometimes. I don't actually know what his missions are. He's a bit of a memer. He can actually be quite funny, but yeah, I don't know what's the topic. They
were trying to pitch some topics, but it turns out we agreed on too much. So I think they're going to just kind of like rapid fire some current events at me, and we're going to get into it because Gilmore's also an attorney. He's great, and so that'll be a good talk. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you so much, Kafka. Everyone, and where do we check that out? Is that a YouTube channel, or do you have a channel?
God, I think it's on Spotify. Let me just say it's on Spotify. They'll correct me later and tell me I did a bad job. Because I said YouTube the other day, and they said it's not on YouTube. So we're going to try Spotify this time, everybody.
All right.
Just look for the G&G podcast.
If you send it to me, I can react to it as well.
Awesome.
Assuming they don't sue me. Thank you so much, Kafka.
No worries. Bye.
Later, brother. All right. What a great call. I really appreciate that conversation. Okay. Enough with this cosplaying and performative bullshit. Keep taking those checks and towing the talking point line. What checks am I? Do you think I'm getting checks from the DNC? That's what I love, guys. Like, if I wanted to grift, wouldn't I just like read the room? Wouldn't I read the room and like totally change who I am? I feel this way also, by the way, on like the Ethan stuff, etc. If I really was just trying to get money, wouldn't I read the room of my audience and just pander to all of you guys and say what I know you want to hear? This is what I know you guys want to hear. Oh shit, Casey John got fucked. Oh, this is a settlement and a half. Holy shit, yeah, she was fucked the whole time. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens. That's what happens when you fuck around and find out. Or, yeah, Hassan got deported. Oh, this baby, whatever. You know how much fucking extra clout and money I would be able to get if I just pandered all the time? And say, yeah, no, I think Democrats are, only and never ever voice of criticism about Democrats. That's what people want in audiences is not everyone, right? Like some people do want a more thoughtful, nuance, whatever, but you get more clout pandering to your base. I know that my audience is not made up mostly of like left-wing socialist types. But I think the same reason a lot of libs start to respect me, some socialists and stuff start to respect me too, because they think that they have this expectation that I'll call balls and strikes as I see them. And so, but I don't know that wins me over like net favor. And I certainly am not getting like checks from the DNC, man. And if I were, I would disclose the fact that I'm getting it. I haven't like taken a sponsorship or anything. I don't know how I would feel about that stuff. I'm just going off of the ad rev, your guys' memberships and other stuff I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, that's all. I'm not, and I would tell you if I took anything. Like, I don't get paid for my appearances on, like, Timpool will give you your cost of, like, they'll pay for the flight, but they'll usually do that directly. Actually, I think they've only ever done it directly. They never, like, transferred me money. They just, like, pay for tickets and shit. Likewise with, like, Breaking Points has never paid me. They're just featuring me, which I think is, like, normal. No, nothing from Chorus. I don't know. I don't know if I would take money in that way. Maybe if it was to do like a particular project, like to start a studio, to start not every leftist is irrational and lacking in pragmatism. No, I'm not suggesting that. All I'm saying is, I think that my audience doesn't tend to lean in the uber leftist, communist, socialist perspective. And I think that some socialists start to appreciate my take when it suits them, right? When it helps them out or when they see the logic of it, or when they feel it's honest and not just based on like relationships and stuff. Stay free. Have you worked with Chorus without taking money? I've talked to Brian Tyler Cohen. I think he's chill. He's been on, I think he was on Live and Learn before. And I know the Chorus people, but have I worked with them? No. Some of the people we were in conversations with for the New York thing. I'm not going to get into the nature of those conversations, but we were talking with a bunch of people. But that was for a different project, right? And it wasn't like me getting paid for anything. Also, I don't really see a need to like disclose every single interaction you are with people. I'm not like getting compensation from these groups. Why not take the money? I feel like 90% of your content would be pretty approved by Chorus. If I did, I would disclose it. I just don't know. I think I would need to think about it. If I, because it's just like the perception of it is important to me and how I would, right? Like, but the problem is like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't in some sense, because there is a kind of incentive structure that people discount, which is the audience incentive structure. Look at Candace Owens. I really do think that incentive structure, not saying that she's a crazy person or that she's knowingly malicious. I'm not saying any of that. Like the jury's out for me. She's either certifiably insane or a complete grifter or somewhere in between. Who knows? But I can see how that would be dangerous for someone like that to get so much attention and views, right? I did this conversation with Avi, and it's not doing as well as my other videos, right? Just off the bat of the initial response to it. But you know, and I hope that it picks up or whatever, and people like it more and more. But sometimes that's going to happen, right? You're going to release content that you really care about, and it's not going to do as well as some of your other stuff, and you just have to be okay with that. But I can see, right? Like, because when you see a video do really well, there was one where I like responded to Mockler, and it was overwhelmingly positive, that one. And then another one was where I was talking to Connor, did very well. All my Connor videos tend to do pretty well. Where it kind of like, you're like, oh shit, this is good. We should give them more of what they want. Another example, right? Like I do my video, my reaction to Ethan Klein's initial lawsuit. All my videos typically very good, like positive thumbs up ratios. That one's like fucking killed. And it kind of gets you in your mind like, wait, do I want to like nuke my channel with videos that get like minus 50 downvotes? And you get yourself thinking about that. And there have been times when I'm like, shit, if I release like a video that is going to be a hot take, it does negatively affect your bottom line. And people don't talk about that as much. They talk about the incentive structures of corporate influence, of political entanglements, that kind of thing. But they talk less about the audience capture sometimes, I feel like, from a monetary perspective. Maybe they do talk about it, but like it's kind of different. It's kind of viewed as more honorable or less nasty if it's audience capture as opposed to a... But the incentives are all kind of the same there, where you're encouraged to do what you do all the time. Because it is directly financial, And so my position has been like long game, focus on long game, like long term, try to establish more like, hey, when Pisco says something about this or that, you might get a take that's a little out there. He might die on some hill that you think is weird, but he's going to give you his authentic opinion, and you're going to know it's his because he'll, fight tooth and nail to defend it. And if I change my mind on something, I know many people don't believe this, I will just be frank with you guys and be like, I changed my mind on stuff. One of the examples on that is the Jasmine Crockett. I went hard on her for like not good enough reasons on one of the Live and Learns. Because I just like saw Loxa Jane's post and got blackpilled on her, but I hadn't really done a deep. And when they kept pushing me on stuff, I'm like, oh shit, I know nothing about this Texas race. I like flubbed up how how Beto did and previous things, and like, I'm way out of my depth here. I should shut up. And then I felt really bad about that. That's why I said that thing on the recent Live and Learn. I just think I was wrong about that. But it can be like, it can actually be quite, putting all your opinions out there. You want everything to be perfect. You want everything to be, but it's never going to be the case. And I am focused on a kind of long term where there's an expectation that I'm willing to talk about my positions, and anyone who disagrees can kind of come up and have a conversation about it, within reason. I'm not gonna fucking. I think that I should move on after a certain while on the Ethan stuff, because I think people do get bored of it. And I did for a long time there, because it was just really the settlement thing that brought it up again. But I think in the long term, maybe there'll be some benefit to having people who respect that. I'm not just gonna be here to pander. But yeah. It's a dance we all do with money, or whatever the quote was you used a few minutes ago with Kafka. In this case, it's just in its high stakes. You mean for the law stuff? Yeah. It's like a game. We get paid. This is what he told me. He's like, we get paid money to play a game, to play this game. And that's what we're doing right here. I think we had just won on a motion to dismiss, or it was some months after that. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, my argument, the one that I found, because I read the contract, and like we convinced the judge, and they like cited the quotes that I found from another case. And I was like, and we were right. Kind of that feeling. Or at least that was the kind of, and we were grabbing some food or something. He's like, like, this is just a game we play for money. And I was like, fuck. And I don't know, like, if that moment, I think that there's some truth to that for sure. But it also kind of like, so am I right or not? Like, what do I take from this? That we were able to convince the judge about this issue and we won on a motion to dismiss? Or is it just like we had the better resources to have me look up all the shit and, spend time tweaking the reply brief to make it perfect and making sure everything was right where it needed to be? Like, what was it? Like, a little bit existential in the moment, but I think it's something to consider when we're talking about these concepts, is to never lose sight that they're all man-made. I really don't want to encourage y'all to accept the frame of like objective morality from Ryan Mullally type people. Not that I do want to talk to Ryan and all this. I'm not throwing shade, but just like never lose sight that what we're dealing with are creations of human beings, and they're being litigated in an actual context where people and property and individuals are actually fighting for stuff, And it's not just this academic formalistic exercise. And that's crucially pretty good transition. What I think this opinion does, this opinion about the National Guard, which we'll get into in a second, but I just do want to open up if people have questions. I'll take a look at chat. Sorry, I've been ignoring it. There's a lot of you. With that said, Crockett's latest ads are flooding my feed, and she comes across great like a normal person. The only thing I'm trying to say, I'm not that Crockett's the best person, just that I was out of my depth in commenting on that race. And I shouldn't have, because I just went off of what I saw Laksha Jain. I'm not saying that he did a wrong analysis, but I hadn't done the work to substantiate that. And in the course of saying that, I was like, oh, I don't think Texas is ready for a female statewide office holder. But it turns out like they already had one. And so I was just like totally talking shit out of my ass and just going off of like vibes. And, I felt bad about it. I'm like, this is exactly what I criticize some libs of doing, of which I'm a part. Some of the other libs on, oh shit, fuck, did I give it away? In the various different places that I comment on, right? And I'm like, fuck, I'm no better. I felt really bad about that, but I have the correction there. I am agnostic as to the race. I'll wait and see what I like from the different candidates. But yeah, apologies to all the Crockett supporters and people. I think it's unfortunate because in this case, I had taken I promise these are coincidences. Same thing with like the Ethan Klein suit on the AI stuff, where that, you could argue that is an example of him doing a lawsuit, maybe for the greater good on AI, where I happen to think that the AI so far, at least in my preliminary review of the issue, AI has the better of the argument so far as fair use is concerned. It just happened to be the case that here I was apologizing for going harder on a more left-wing candidate. But it really is, I think, a standard that I should apply consistently, where if I speak out of turn on a race. And and it is an example of propaganda. Let me give you another example of it too before I get into the opinion. In the 2016 election, I remember distinctly thinking Clinton should be in jail. She committed a crime of mishandling classified information. And I remember like sitting at I'll never forget, because this person has never made me forget. There was a moment where I was like sitting at a dinner table and I'm like, Clinton is a criminal. We need to punish the Democratic Party. And I caught myself like just sounding like all the people today, right? Democratic Party needs to be punished for selecting a criminal, I said. And now ultimately I voted for Hillary Clinton. I want to assure you. But that was like a very Bernie bro moment of me. And I'll never forget, it was a very close family friend. If she's watching, she knows who she is. She's like, I don't believe you. Like, I can't believe you're saying this right now. The other party is Trump, right? And the way she looked at me, like, sticks with me. But I obviously did vote for Hillary Clinton. At the time, reluctantly. Now, like, what wouldn't I give to have Hillary Clinton? But I'm just saying to show you, like, that was propaganda. That was propaganda. There is not good evidence that Hillary Clinton criminally mishandled her documents. But I bought the Reddit narrative. I bought the like Russian talking point. And I like to think that I'm better than that now. I think I am better than where I was. And I'm not saying that Laksha is the equivalent of Russia. But it really, I think, it forces you to always question those first principles. Always question what you think you know. So like, it could be the case that his analysis as to which is the best candidate, where I think he really has a all-red bias in the sense that he thinks that he would have been the strongest candidate to go against Paxton or one of the others. I haven't seen her latest speech, though. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm just saying I shouldn't state it as fact before I know the basis of it. And it's something maybe I'll DM him and ask him, like, well, can you talk to me a little bit? Or maybe I'll find the thread where he explains it all. But I shouldn't just read what he says and then regurgitate it as my own opinion, because I generally think that he's like, I don't know, I guess a smart dude. Because we saw how that worked with Nate Silver, etc. There are some people, right? Like, and it is of note, right? Like, I think like we should listen to people who we think are generally smarter, but let's just not take it for what they say for granted. And I also want you to do that of me and like my takes. I don't claim to be an authority on, I'm not a constitutional law scholar. I am a lawyer. I believe I understand certain constitutional principles well. Hang on a second, folks. Be right back. One sec. Okay. Coming back. This is a hutch ass rant. Sorry. Okay. Oh, one last thing on I think I was just talking about how you don't take what I say as gospel. I'm just a dude. Just a dude on mic. Where were we? Oh, one last thing on citizenship. I've mentioned this before, but the person I was interacting with on Twitter, he seemed to take this view that the jurisdiction referenced here in the citizenship clause, this is an example, I think, of propaganda. Someone has convinced him that this jurisdiction, thank you so much. If the Gondom and Gilmore pod invites you, would you go? It depends. I don't know anything about the podcast, but I'm open to having conversations with people. And I have had plenty of conversation with Gondom. If this is the actual Gondom, then maybe I would. Not sure though. Where were we? Fuck. he seemed to be convinced that jurisdiction here is a reference to political jurisdiction, by which he meant citizenship. But just notice the extent of the argument that what Trump is clamoring for is that we should read this entire thing as relating to political allegiance. That's at least one of their interpretations. Or domicile. And the reason they say this is pretty much exclusively premised on bullshit quote mining of different statements made in the congressional debates, quote mining of some of the drafters, but they don't actually deal with like the words here. And so like I am looking for one person that is able to produce evidence that what is meant by jurisdiction, that there's any meaning of jurisdiction which includes just like domicile, the domicile of a person. When has the term jurisdiction been used as a reference to domicile status or reference to political allegiance? Never, 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 never. Not in the sense that we're using subject to the jurisdiction. And understand also the consequences of that view, that if this means political allegiance, and if what is meant by that is, well, first let's take the two views, because one of the views is that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means domicile. And if so you guys understand what domicile is one's intent to live in a particular place permanently, right? And the fact that they live there. So you live in a place, you reside in a place, and you intend to live there permanently. That was what the common law was at the time this constitutional framework was established. But understand the import of this. If that is the case, if subject to the jurisdiction of means domicile, then even the children of U.S. citizens born in the United States, they would not be subject to the jurisdiction thereof if that means domicile, if their parents weren't domiciled in America. Or, for example, let's say they were temporarily living in the United States, but they planned to go move to Europe, then they wouldn't be domiciled in America. They wouldn't meet the legal test for domicile. And so any interpretation of this view would leave huge holes. And this is the kind of thing where I get very annoyed at the Supreme Court, because they'll just resolve the case in a way that favors Trump. So if the Supreme Court, which I don't think they will, would interpret subject to the jurisdiction thereof to mean those who are domiciled in America, not clear why Native Americans who were not thought to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States would be not domiciled in America at the time that this was, discovered. It's not clear why this would not apply more broadly to citizens and excluding them, right? And if this means political allegiance, by which is meant citizenship, then this wouldn't have actually freed slaves, right? All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, if this means political allegiance, and how this gets broken down further is because they quote mine this other tweet from one of the other drafters that says foreigners, comma, aliens, comma, who are, right? We did that whole debate. Then it means all foreigners are not politically aligned to the United States and therefore not covered by this. But then again, that just wouldn't do what everyone agrees this clause indisputably does, which is provide citizenship to freed slaves. And so there's no good way to read it. And I get blackpilled to the Supreme Court, or in other contexts, I would be blackpilled to the Supreme Court taking up this case in the first place, given that it's binding precedent of the court, Wong Kim Ark. But I don't think you should read into that granting of cert too deeply here. I think that this is a significantly large issue, that was the reason for this accepting cert. It's not like there's a massive circuit split here or the other rationales, but members of the court have indicated that is exactly what they want to see more of, or at least Kavanaugh has. And so my guess is that they are going to uphold birthright citizenship in this context. I don't think that they're going to get rid of it. That said, on any case where Trump has an interest in it, I give about 30% of this for the Supreme Court to just grant him the win on some bullshit. And I would tend to think that any dodge by the Supreme Court of this issue, other than digging the case — do you guys know what digging the case means? Dismissing as improvidently granted, which they're not going to do because they thought really hard about granting it. That's like for other cases where their clerks are involved for digging a case. That will certainly not happen. But any other kind of dodge where it's like contingent on state rules for domicile or contingent on state interpretations of stuff, any attempt to outsource this determination, which is kind of what they start to do, and make it subject to executive discretion in terms of enforcement or state classification when it comes to different rules, that would be a Trump win. Anything less than like a wholesale readoption of Wong Kim Ark and the originalist interpretation of the 14th Amendment, I think would be a huge loss for the country and a huge win for Trump. So that's where we're at on the citizenship clause. Still looking for people to debate me on it. I don't actually think that there's an appetite for it at the moment because it's just a horrible argument. But that's where we're at. Okay, on to our legal updates for the National Guard. A bit of procedural background here. You guys will recall this case actually started months ago during like around the No Kings protest, and it deals with the executive and their authority, the federal authority that is, to federalize the National Guards, which have these kind of dual roles. As a default, they are under state authorities and under the control of the governors, the modern day militia. Now, Congress has provided different authorities for calling forth the militia, in other words, federalizing the National Guard. And the Trump administration invoked one of these bases for federalization in various, well, it was more in June, but subsequent orders further detailed what was meant by it. The California National Guard, or they cited the California issues to basically give justification for a broader set of National Guard deployments. And they've done various different federalizations across the country, specifically California, Illinois, Oregon, DC, which doesn't need to be like federalized because DC is already not like a state. So there the issue is the deployment and the actions being done. And then Tennessee as well, where they have the participation of the governor there in Memphis. So it's a little bit of a different set of issues there. And the issues relate to, as I've talked about before, whether it's authorized to federalize, whether it's authorized to deploy, and whether the conduct of the National Guard members breaks some other law. And that is the posse comitatus issues, some equal protection issues as well, related to some of these stops. So posse comitatus is enforcing civilian law by the military, in general, not okay to do. And then some of the other constitutional issues, discrete complaints about mistreatment, and sometimes even allegations as to broader misconduct, racial stops, stuff like that. So this case has been around for a while. How it initially turned out was Breyer found that the federalization was illegal in that the prerequisites for invoking federalization under the statute, I think it's 12406. 12406. Let's see. Yeah. Section 12406 were not met. And he ordered a TRO that enjoined, meaning stopped, ordered them to stop the federalization and declare it like not happening at the moment. That was Breyer reaching the federalization issue and not reaching posse comitatus. Okay? That TRO was appealed immediately, and the Ninth Circuit issued a stay. And they issued a stay on the basis that 12406, the preconditions it sets for federalization, there's a huge amount of deference given to the executive. Not precluding judicial review amount of discretion. So it's reviewable as a matter of law. The courts are allowed to actually consider, even with a deferential look, they're allowed to take a look at these mobilizations. I thought the decision was horrible. I thought the decision made no sense as a textual matter. It seemed that the decision was in some parts influenced by prior precedent on other predecessor statutes that didn't appear to stand the test of the Supreme Court precedent on things like the Alien Enemies Act and other areas where the court has not made such deferential findings as to the president. But ultimately, that's the decision that a panel of the Ninth Circuit a panel of 3 judges on the Ninth Circuit went with. This kind of like very highly deferential standard. Yes, we're going to review. Trump doesn't have this whole argument. You know, he's always saying like it's unreviewable, totally unreviewable. He didn't win on the argument that it's unreviewable, but he got a high deference in terms of what's happening. And they applied this like So to remind you guys, hang on, maybe I'll pull up the actual statute so you can see it. I think it's 10 USC 12406. So you can see the, yep. Isn't it crazy how I remember all this stuff, folks? All right. Yeah, so no, patrol and crowd control, actually, those are examples, I believe, of law enforcement. I don't even think they could do that, just so that you're aware, under posse comitatus. But I might be wrong about that. So the Ninth Circuit essentially said, hey, these are preconditions. It says whenever one of these three preconditions, or many more, or one or more of the preconditions exist, the president may call into federal service these different members of the National Guard. And what the Ninth Circuit found is highly deferential to the president and their determinations. And additionally, we're going to interpret this the president is unable to, with the regular forces, to execute the laws of the United States as not inability, right? So the law says unable. That's what the literal text of the law says, that in order to invoke this federalization statute, the president needs to be unable, with the regular forces, we'll get to that, to execute the laws of the United States. And the court says, well, what we mean by unable, we're going to interpret creatively unable to mean significant imposition to execute the laws of the United States. And because we have this highly deferential test that we're going to apply on the stay, remember, the stay on the TRO, that's the procedural posture. You're supposed to run through like the merits. And so one of the factors, the merits of the case, they basically said deferential to the president, not total inability, significant imposition, and the allegations that we have from the president meet this kind of minimum threshold of significant imposition on federal law. A lot of issues I have with that, namely the amount of deference given to the president, interpreting inability or unable to mean significant imposition, just like a clear textual, bullshit situation. And yeah, so that's what they found. And they didn't find anything on rebellion, etc. But on those grounds, they stayed the TRO that was then active in the district court by Judge Breyer. Understand that it's a panel decision, not the whole in-bank Ninth Circuit. And right now, there's I think the Ninth Circuit, there's going to be in-bank oral arguments, or there's going to be some broader consideration on a different case from Oregon that's also appealed to the Ninth Circuit on like the correct standard here. But there's a lot of apparent disagreement now in the Ninth Circuit, even certain judges writing dissents/concurrences in a kind of related but distinct appeal situation. And then separately, there was a docket update in which at least one member of the Ninth Circuit proposed actually and requested briefing from all the parties for in-bank consideration. Okay? But that opinion, you can tell based on further and subsequent orders by Breyer, he doesn't agree with it. He's bound by it, and he goes by it, but he's been calling attention, I think, in his opinions about how untenable it is, but nonetheless applying it. And it's totally unjustifiable in my view, what the Ninth Circuit panel did in that case. And that was 2 Trump appointees, I think, or at least 2 Republican appointees and 1 Biden appointee. So, and they were unanimous on that in that case. Keep that in mind. Anyway, that's the backdrop here. After that TRO was stayed by the Ninth Circuit, there was additional proceedings in the district court here on posse comitatus, not about the federalization, but specifically on what the National Guard was doing during this whole saga, namely enforcing civilian law. So regardless of whether or not the federalization is legal, Breyer then took the not addressed issue of, are they enforcing civilian law contrary to posse comitatus, which prohibits it, or at least purports to prohibit it. Okay? And after a trial, Breyer found that they did violate posse comitatus. In an opinion, I thought that was incredibly well reasoned, where he took shots at the Ninth Circuit. Separately, all the shit's going on in those different other states, and there's another repeat appeal by California. Hey, some time has passed by. And regardless of whether there was an initial justification to federalize the National Guard and federal service, that prerequisite has passed, right? So it used to be the case that there was this ridiculous standard, the significant imposition on the ability to, with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, but that doesn't exist anymore. Because all the shit about, the ICE protests, all the stuff about the No King's March, that's all done. And so the basis of you having these National Guards in your service, Mr. President, is no longer existing. And so you need to unfederalize them because the basis under 12406 has now been eliminated due to the course of events. And that seems natural, right? Like, otherwise, imagine it otherwise. Oh, you could just keep the National Guard in federal service so long as there's an initial, Tony McStoner. I remember when you read Denham's lawsuit versus Ethan before it was dropped and said it had merit and was valid. Were you wrong about that? How can we trust your reading of suits? So this person's a fucking idiot. So Denham's never filed a lawsuit. And there I was assuming her facts. I said, if it's true that he lied about this, would it be defamation per se? So if it's true, you accuse me of doing a crime, would that be a statement such that it would fall under the defamation law, a statement of fact? Yes. Would it be defamation per se? Yes. So no part of my legal analysis has been undermined by the passage of time. That suit was never filed. And as I recall, I think Ethan came out with an apology, or at least a backtrack, and said, I never suggested that anyway. So to be clear about what's going on, what you have people who will tell these memes about things I've said. Total lies. Very stupid people, low IQ, who don't understand what's going on. And obviously what I said there is it's colorable. If you can prove that he actually did allege that you committed a crime, that is reporting falsely regarding CPS, that would be defamation per se. It's an accusation of criminal activity. And I'm not hearing you to dispute the nature of that analysis, just to be clear. So you have a bunch of very, very stupid people calling in to make these little snipes. But what can you do other than provide them the facts and logic? They go off of emotion, a lot of these people. Highly emotional. All right, back to the National Guard opinion. The proposal, modest proposal, that Trump is advocating for is essentially to extend his control of the National Guard so long as there's a colorable basis initially to federalize. Got it? And that's the context you have to understand. This is why Breyer, in this opinion, claims to be so flabbergasted at the arguments, is because you really have to sit and think about the potential import of that doctrine if it were to be accepted by the courts. Namely, that the president could trivially, under the the very low standard that the Ninth Circuit set, have some initial condition that meets the National Guard, and even past when that condition persists, maintain control of it. So here we go. The founders designed our government to be a system of checks and balances, and this is the banger line. Defendants, however, make clear that the only check they want is a blank one, a blank check. Citing Madison, to what expedient then shall we finally resort for maintaining in practice the necessary partition of power among the several departments as laid down in the Constitution? This is saying, in practice, what are we able to do to make sure that all the system that we've created will actually stay the way it is? The only answer that can be given is that as all these exterior provisions are found to be inadequate, the defect must be supplied by so contriving the interior structure of the government as that its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. In other words, this is more or less what Scalia was arguing in that clip that I often show, and everyone actually, I think is starting to, accept at least some of the prescient nature of it, that the internal structure, the Constitution, the separation of powers, is the big garter against overreach by the government, not these liberties, which were afterthoughts. The Bill of Rights, all afterthoughts. Same thing, by the way, people tell you the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment isn't the protection against tyranny. The Second Amendment is an afterthought. Protection against tyranny, as the framers understood it, were the checks and balances, separation of powers. 6 months after they first federalized the California National Guard defendants, that is, the government, still retain control of approximately 300 guardsmen, despite no evidence that execution of federal law is impeded in any way, let alone significantly. That's an allusion to the Ninth Circuit panel's test here, where they change the meaning of inability to mean significant imposition or significant impact. What's more, defendants have sent California guardsmen into other states, effectively creating a national police force made up of state troops. In response to plaintiff's motion to enjoin this conduct, that means to stop, defendants take a position that after a valid initial federalization, all subsequent refederalizations are completely and forever unreviewable by the courts. Defendant's position is contrary to law. Accordingly, the court enjoins defendant's federalization of California National Guard troops. And they get into the background of all the shit that was going on. We're going to skip all the shit. You know the facts. They issued new orders later on to extend past the initial timetable that Hegseth had all set out, which was like more limited in scope. But what this administration often does is they extend it past when they say they're going to do it. And they did that with the Muslim ban too. Remember when Trump was like, we need a complete and total Muslim ban until we figure out what the hell's going on. They just keep going. And you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Okay. Getting down to the meat and potatoes. And this is where I say, like, I think the court has a forest approach. He's not just stuck in the trees. He's seen the other instances of federalization and deployment of the National Guard as relevant to his analysis, because of course it is. It speaks to the greater constitutional harm that is potentially lurking were the court to accept Trump's argument, which of course it would be ridiculous if they did. While the case was stayed before this court, a series of significant events occurred, all demonstrating defendants' expansive view of Trump's powers under Section 12406. On September 28th, they called Oregon into service after Oregon declined. Defendants appealed the first TRO, but not the second, although the Ninth Circuit stayed the first TRO in Oregon. An in-bank court has since vacated the panel decision and granted rehearing. This is the case that I'm referencing where it's like the Ninth Circuit is going to rehear aspects of the Oregon case, which more, I think, squarely presents an opportunity to overturn that, in my opinion, they should. So Pisco's excuse, he took denim suit verbatim. Bro, this guy's so dumb, so fucking dumb. You just don't understand the scope of what I said. When I say something, for example, which is like, hey, this as alleged states a claim. That is, that's no more or less than saying it's legal analysis. States a claim upon which relief can be granted. That's part of the legal analysis. They never filed a lawsuit, dipshit. It was a demand letter that contained, or facts, if true, which would state a claim of relief. That's all I said. But you guys are so into like your little group cultures and group think that you can't handle people who think unemotionally with logic and reason. Same thing in Illinois, ditto Illinois. There, the kind of an interesting opinion, which we'll get into from the district court. And this Illinois litigation is what's going to be before the Supreme Court on some discrete issues, where, just to preempt people, don't expect this court to significantly curtail Trump's authorities for the National Guard. And the reason doesn't have to do with like the best reading of the statutes or the Constitution or the authorities invoked, but rather the fact that they want to have this kind of like unitary executive, and they feel quite uncomfortable with any other form of government stepping into the president and what they feel his proper role is. That includes Congress, that includes the courts in terms of what standard they're going to apply for deference. And it also, incidentally, includes the states here, where you would hope, right, like states' rights matter. You would think that, right, like these constitutional conservatives would have an appreciation for state prerogatives, state authorities, etc. But just don't expect good things coming out of SCOTUS on anything touching on Trump's like powers with respect to the National Guard. And again, I want to stress it's not because of any justifiable legal principle, but rather this realist analysis that I'm offering you. The district court stated, this is April Perry in favor of the state of Illinois, city of Chicago, and then the Seventh Circuit basically affirmed and denied the motion to stay that appeal. And this is what's before the Supreme Court. Sick. All right. And that is relevant because those are the times in which he invoked 12406 to federalize the National Guard, and that's the statute most at issue. They didn't invoke that for purposes of the DC deployment, and with the Tennessee deployment, they have the help of the state governor in that case. You get me? Cool. And a preliminary injunction is an extraordinary remedy. These are the normal standards for preliminary injunctions. And remember, this is California asking, hey, I know we were stayed on our TRO before, and we had this like opinion out of the Ninth Circuit, but like, what about now? Like, we didn't have nearly the same facts, or we don't currently have the same facts that quote unquote justified the deployment or the federalization back in June, etc., that we do now. Now, like, we don't have massive protests. There's like no imposition on the enforcement of federal law so far as we can see. And so this is the court thinking like, okay, is there a continuing obligation for the federalization to be supported by one of these three grounds before we have to like give it back to the states? Okay, so establishing the likelihood to succeed on the merits. The first issue, as they will always argue, is reviewability. Thank you so much. Not to derail Kiven's Supreme Court rulings and likely ruling press can fire heads of independent agencies. What is the end game? Won't Democratic presidents get to do the same? Yeah, but like, the Democrats aren't going to, they're going to try to, this is going to sound very, all conservatives, please close your ears, because this will trigger you. Okay? This will trigger all of the conservatives in the chat. The Democrats aren't really interested in enacting policy to like benefit their immediate family and shit like that. They will do stuff on the margins. They will like accept cash from different interests for their campaigns and shit. But the kind of people that they put in power, at least in recent years, they have no interest in basically operating the government at the behest of the personal interests of the president. That's basically what I'm getting at. You get me? So Trump wants to politicize the Fed. It doesn't seem like Democrats have an interest in that. Trump wants to make sure that there's no enforcement from a monopoly perspective from the FTC or DOJ against people that he doesn't, or corporations that he wants to protect, right? Democrats don't really have an interest in that, right? They nominated and approved Lena Khan, who was going after a lot of monopolies. Sometimes people say too much. Trump wants to get rid of all the IGs, right? And prevent any kind of internal compliance measures. Biden literally let them have a special counsel into himself and didn't interfere with it. Now, I obviously disagree with the pardons into his son, but we've talked about that at length, but he didn't interfere with that that investigation. And so it just like, it's one of those things, it's kind of the opposite of the getting rid of the filibuster, where Republicans don't really have any good ideas that they want to do with the getting rid of the filibuster. And so the protection of the filibuster seems more calibrated to prevent internal problems and give them additional padding on votes, and perhaps to protect against Democrats using that precedent to do shit. Maybe, right? Here it's kind of the opposite. We're like, why do Democrats, what is their interest in this case of making these independent agencies more politicized and more responsive to the president in that sense? Like, that has not been a significant area of, Biden trying to push that way, or Obama. Obama kept on Comey, or he might have even first appointed Comey. Obama kept on Republicans in his administration. Obama, Biden, similar things. He was willing to, and one of his main aims was to break bread with Republicans. Doesn't seem like he had that same interest. So I just don't really. It's similar also to the Chevron doctrine, where they get rid of the Chevron doctrine because specifically they understand. Now you can make the argument it's all about the law. I think that's a little bit naive, but assume for a second, put aside the actual legal issue, which I don't think is what's motivating them. If I'm being honest, there's an anti-regulatory mood to the decision to overturn the Chevron doctrine with respect to agencies, because they understand that like Republicans want less regulation, they want more like corporate and business leeway, and so that's it's not doesn't have that like double edgedness to it, the same way that some other things might. And lastly, Trump for the United States looked no different, right? No one was scared of Biden like abusing his powers now that he had this like potential insulation from attack. No one was really scared about that. Of President Biden doing some crazy shit or being incentivized to do some insane shit now that the fear of future prosecution was gone. So whatever the incentive structures are for the conservatives, it's not clear to me that they're always on all fours with what motivates the Democrats. And in this case, I just don't think that they're that worried about Democrats imposing, I don't know, some FTC commissioner who's free from, directly fireable. They understand that the FTC commissioners are going to be appointed by the Democrats, and they might not agree with them, but I don't think that they're that worried about the abuse that comes from it. The spy said, I told you to close your ears, man. If you want to talk about it, you can come on stream. I see you always chirping in there, bruh. Obama. Always chirping. Okay, so obviously the first argument that Trump's going to levy on the merits is that you courts, you can't even review this shit. You can't even talk about this. And always first principles, right? Does it surprise you that the court is once again citing Marbury versus Madison? It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Defendants say that we are not subject to judicial review, but it is the case. Deciding whether a party's interpretation of a statute is correct is a familiar judicial exercise. And every court, then this is true, even for Newsom, right? The Newsom decision that I disagree with. Every court to consider whether federalization is reviewable has answered in the affirmative. Even the Newsom opinion, right? We disagree with the defendant's contention that 12406 completely precludes judicial review of the president's determination that a statutory precondition exists. Illinois the same. And that's true of the appellate decision as well. So every court that's considered it says you can't say it's unreviewable. It is definitely reviewable. Undeterred, defendants justify their recycled arguments by contending that Newsom was only controlling as to the memo and that the orders are different. So this is the same kind of like bullshit that they always will pull is, the opinion only matters for the specific facts of the case and only those facts. And so we love everything about Newsom. We'll cite it all the time. But this one area where they said, okay, the courts can have some review about what the fuck's going on here. They're like, oh, but you don't need to listen to that part because that part is only for the specific facts. So that's the height of like bad faith, in my opinion. Bullshit, but not unexpected. And we have to waste time and ink to address the reviewability arguments. Fucking stupid. Defendant's second run at reviewability also falls flat. And Breyer is not. He is not confused. He is. This is all just a pointless exercise. But they're throwing out everything they have because they would rather, just like in the Trump v. United States decision and the Anderson decision, where they have all these backup arguments to give some procedural bullshit ground for a Republican judge, a judge appointed by a Republican, to give them some leeway on it. So they're super technical proceduralists when it comes to their arguments in court, except when it doesn't matter. But obviously they don't care about procedure one lick when it comes to public policy or defending themselves in the eyes of the American people. Then they throw caution to the wind. Who cares about procedure? But very much in the court, they always want to have these backup arguments, these universal injunctions. The court can't literally order us to do this, or certification is wrong, or this specific TRO isn't something that you can do. Like there's always some bullshit like that. And so here, they're saying like you can't even review this when it's not an initial order but a follow-up order or something, or like a continuation of a prior order. For starters, defendants concede that Newsom allows some measure of review of Section 12406 prerequisites, and I actually don't disagree with the defendants there. I think that this is exactly true. It's some measure. It's very little, some measure. That's why I think one of the reasons why that opinion is so shambolic and awful. That is explicitly what both challenged orders here do. That is, call people into federal service. The August 5th order calls people into service. The California National Guard from the October 16th order were also called into service under 10-12-406. By defendant's own admission, then, these orders are reviewable. That's just like 1 + 1 = 2. This is Patrick Wallet meme being shown to you in real time. You concede that orders to call people into service are reviewable. Yup. You concede that this is calling people into service. Yup. So you concede we can review this. Nope. That is literally what they're doing. Defendants nevertheless attempt to circumvent the scope of Section 12406 by characterizing the orders as extensions, which they argue are outside the statute's reach. Citing the opposition brief, Congress decided against subjecting the continuation of the mission to further regulation by 12406. Indeed, at the morning hearing, defendants confirmed their position that after an initial federalization, all extensions of federalization orders are utterly unreviewable forever. That is shocking. That is shocking. Adopting defendants' interpretation of Section 12406 would permit a president to create a perpetual police force comprised of state troops so long as they were first federalized lawfully. Such a scenario would validate the founders' widespread fear of a national standing army, which they believe posed an intolerable threat to individual liberty and to the sovereignty of the separate states. Defendants' argument for a president to hold unchecked power to control state troops would wholly upend the federalism that is at the heart of the system of government. It is really shocking the conscience, but not really like surprising that they claim this much authority. And you would think from principled Republicans or whatever the fuck these people are calling themselves these days, they used to say like, oh, don't tread on me, don't tread. But like, it was all a fucking act. The minute that they can fucking lick a boot, these Republicans are there licking it and saying, yup, Trump should be able to commandeer all these state National Guard troops, man. I mean, who the fuck knows? Why not state cops? I don't think it would end. He has the inherent authority to impress state officers into service. Presidential claim to a power at once so conclusive and preclusive must be scrutinized with caution, citing Youngstown, for what is at stake is equilibrium established by our constitutional system. The statutory framework repudiates defendant's position. As plaintiffs argue, and as this court discusses in greater detail, 12406 authorizes federalization only when one of its factual predicates is presently satisfied. Accordingly, each affirmative order authorizing federalization, whether a subsequent distinct federalization or what defendants call an extension, must comply with the exigency requirements at the time it is effectuated. Any other reading would just be like bizarre. Oh yeah, Congress wanted to give away all of its power, and the president can just one time invoke this statute, and now we can, whenever we want, call into, have any amount of National Guard become our secret police. That's really what Trump wants to tell you is the best reading of the statute. That Congress created a scheme where only the first call into service is reviewable. But after that, go ham. You can fucking keep them forever. That's really what, thank you so much for the sub. That's really what they want us to think was the statutory intent of Congress when it passed 10 U.S.C. 1246. Now, is there any evidence for that? Is there any evidence of like debates where they're like, yeah, this will be the correct balanced approach where the courts have review of just the first part, and then after that, presidents can do whatever the fuck they want. One guy, one time. Like, it's an absurd thing on its face that this is what Congress intended. Or even if, maybe it would be allowed under Congress authorities, perhaps, but it would seemingly, like, at some point, can we start talking about non-delegation doctrine in this context? Like, we already talked about that in the tariff context, where Trump's interpretation is we can tariff all we want at unlimited amounts, unlimited countries for unlimited time, no ever anything restricting it whatsoever. When can we start talking about non-delegation in the context of calling forth that Congress can delegate some, but not all of this authority? My guess is the court will not be, by which I mean the Supreme Court is not going to be eager to hear that argument. But I think it's important to think about. Noodle Mixing Sound asks, it's great that they're tackling this post-mortem, but when are we going to deem the initial deployment illegal? There was no justification. I mean, I agree with this, but I kind of went into it initially. He's hamstrung here, Breyer is, by the panel decision, and that's kind of on review right now in the Ninth Circuit, in the broader Ninth Circuit, and so they're dealing with the initial. In fact, I even think the panel itself is reviewing the TRO itself. So remember, all that was done in the context of the appellate litigation from a procedural perspective is the Ninth Circuit panel stayed the TRO, but they haven't reviewed it yet. It just happens that the stay factors include some kind of signaling and really usually dispositive on where the panel is going to determine the legal issue. And that's why this shadow docket stuff, these emergency orders, are starting to become like the place where law is decided on an expedited basis after like minimal briefing compared to normal cases and stuff. So we are still yet to hear more from the Ninth Circuit specifically, and hopefully the Supreme Court on initial deployments as to other cases. As far as the Supreme Court's concerned, that would be in the Seventh Circuit and what's going on in Chicago. Yeah, no problem. And remember, this is also, Noodle, not addressing the issue of posse comitatus, which is the conduct of the National Guard, not just the Federalization, but whether they're enforcing civilian law contrary to posse comitatus. So that's an even separate issue, which they had a trial about in California. And there's a separate statute here that talks about when the president can end it. And I'm not going to bore you with that stuff, but there's another statute which the court actually agrees with Trump's reading of 12407, but it just doesn't matter for purposes of the analysis here. So I'll show you, right? Defendants insist that there's no language in 12406 or 12407 or in the Ninth Circuit's decision in Newsom that allows judicial review for anything but the initial federalization. On the other side, plaintiffs argue that 12407's purpose is to limit the president's power over the duration of the federalization, not to grant him absolute discretion. In the court's view, defendants, that is Trump, has the better reading of 12407. 12407 explicitly gives the president the option to specify a period of service in the call. Nowhere does it describe a maximum period that the president may authorize. So understand the nuance there, that there's a separate provision right after 12406 that seems to say that the president can put time limits on it, but doesn't give a specific time amount that they're allowed to do it. And defendants say that's an actual substantive limit. What the court here is saying, it's not. The president is allowed to claim a duration, an indefinite duration, but that's a separate question for whether it's reviewable. You understand? So whether or not the president can claim it doesn't mean that he can claim it, or that he's statutorily barred from a particular duration. The mere fact that Trump is right on that interpretation doesn't mean that it can't be adjudged to be illegal if he does it for a certain amount of time, or if the prerequisites under 12406, the ones that we went through, remember 12406, and we can actually just go to 12407, right? Whenever the president calls the National Guard of a state into federal service, he may specify in the call the period of the service. And this is, on plaintiff's view, like a substantive limitation on how long he can do it. And the court is here saying, no, Trump is right about this. But that doesn't mean that the president's discretion over the service period is absolute, or that the service period can be indefinite. During oral arguments in the Ninth Circuit for this case, Judge Miller expressed concern about this idea, asking if there was any time limit for how long it can stay federalized. When defendants answered that there was no limit, Judge Miller asked if the facts that Section 12406 say the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws, not, was some distant time in the past when he decided to federalize them, doesn't that suggest that it has to be tied to what current conditions are? And so this is Judge Breyer looking at the oral arguments and saying, look, this judge is making a good point. Like, the fact that it's speaking in the present tense suggests that the conditions need to persist, regardless of what the president says the duration ought be, that he has an obligation for the duration throughout the duration, to have those prerequisites always active. Like, you can't federalize with 12406 unless one of the prerequisites exists currently. Plaintiffs persuasively point to a legislative history indicating that Congress did not intend for the service period to last forever. The removal, but there was there used to be a 9-month limitation on this, and they got rid of it. The removal of the 9-month limitation was part of an effort to ensure that guardsmen could respond to a call for troops issued by the president under the conditions of emergency. The then acting Secretary of War, Robert Shaw Oliver, made clear that the limit was generously waived with the understanding that guardsmen would render service in any theater of military activity to which they may be called to, and to continue in such service until the necessity for their employment no longer exists. Consequently, if this were the case, if there were a case where the president had neglected to specify a call-up period, it would still be reviewable, right? So if the president never says, doesn't give a specific deadline, it wouldn't mean all of a sudden we would lose reviewability, but that seems to be what is being suggested here. After all, it is nonsensical to suggest that the law would permit a president to take advantage of an exigency, omit a call-up period, and then send guardsmen wherever he wanted for as long as he wanted. Such a scenario would make a mockery out of the narrow preconditions Congress set forth in Section 12406 when it delegated its call-up power. Again, specifying, and this is why one of the other reasons I love the opinion, clarity on what we're talking about in terms of who has this power. This is a congressional authority. Congress provides for calling forth a militia. Congress is the one with that power. Now, the president is the commander-in-chief of the militias and National Guard, the equivalent, right, when they are actually in federal service. But it's ultimately Congress's decision about whether and how to call up the National Guard into federal service. And I love that emphasis by Breyer. And citing the Ninth Circuit panel decision, at least on that point, Congress has delegated some of its power to call forth the militia in 12406 for certain exigent circumstances. So again, interpreting the statute so as to not produce the absurd result where the president has basically uncabined power. Congress wouldn't have done this. Congress was putting very narrow limitations in its calling forth statute, very narrow, and so we shouldn't read this as providing like an eternal National Guard the way that Trump wants it, right? Of course, a president is not required to identify a service period when first issuing an order. Presidents cannot be expected to know at the start of an exigency how long it will last. But if the exigency is over and the president refuses to relinquish control, the state may seek court review of whether the preconditions are still met, with all appropriate deference given to the president. Regardless, this scenario is not at issue here, where the president and the Secretary of War did identify periods of service. Those subsequent orders federalizing troops are reviewable. So even assuming that this were the case, right? Even assuming that it was the situation, this absurd land that we live in, that you could have this indefinite kind of period of National Guard service. That's not what happened here, says Breyer. What happened here was you had an initial time period, and then you made a new time period, right? So in what sense is that an extension? You had a time period, we reviewed it, and then you made another order with its own time period. And so even if we lived in your absurd world, it wasn't an extension. It was another calling forth. Defendants also raise other arguments opposing reviewability. Defendants attempt to characterize plaintiff's motion as being centered on the quantity federalized, but that's not true. Defendants argue that judicial review poses separation of powers concerns. They contend that the review of the commander-in-chief's on-the-ground decision-making would interject judiciary into military chain of command and constitute improper micromanaging. But that's precisely what was their argument in the initial review, right? Anything that's true about micromanaging from the continuation of calling forth the militia, surely that's also at issue in the initial decision. I love this part. Courts traditionally have been reluctant to intrude upon the authority of the executive in military and national security affairs, but reluctance does not mean refusal. Courts have reviewed, albeit cautiously, military actions before, and the judiciary's willingness to intrude into military affairs is greatest when the military is deployed domestically. The Supreme Court has emphasized, indeed, when presented with claims of judicially cognizable injury resulting from military intrusion into the civilian sectors, federal courts are fully empowered to consider claims of those asserting such injury. There is nothing in our nation's history or in this court's decided cases, including our holding today, that can properly be seen as giving any indication that actual or threatened injury by reason of unlawful activities in the military would go unnoticed or unremedied. In sections 12406 and 12407, Congress has articulated the necessary preconditions for the president to exercise his delegated power. It is then up to the court to review, with appropriate deference, whether the preconditions have been met. Finally, defendant's argument that reviewability would permit judicial review on every day of the mission is unsupported. Plaintiffs certainly have not peppered the court with frequent challenges to federalizations, and the court is not aware that defendants have faced this issue in their other National Guard cases either. Even if defendants' fear did come to pass, courts have long been capable of handling vexatious litigants and meritless actions. The court determines that both of these are reviewable. Defendants next argue that plaintiffs are unlikely to succeed because they cannot meet the high threshold for ultra-virus theory. We can skip all this stuff and get to the merits. Defendants also argue that plaintiffs are unlikely to succeed because even if the court can review these orders, those orders easily satisfy Section 12406. So this is the meat and potatoes. Ready, guys? We're almost done. In rejecting defendants' argument that a president's determinations under 12406 are entirely unreviewable, the Ninth Circuit instructed that courts may at least review the president's determination to ensure that it reflects a colorable assessment of facts and law within a range of honest judgment. This is the bullshit test that we were thrown by the panel of the Ninth Circuit that is so deferential. I mean, think about it, right? We at least can review, at least. What does that mean? So what are we supposed to review? Just at least? The president's determination to ensure that it reflects a colorable, just colorable. You know what colorable is? Colorable is just like, potentially plausible. Not on its face frivolous. That's colorable. Colorable is a low standard assessment of the facts within a range of honest judgment. And it seems, though it's not entirely clear, that there are two inquiries under the court's analysis, the panel that is being referenced here. One is whether it's colorable, and two, whether it's honest/good faith. Those seem to be like the two, to the extent that they have a test here, what the Ninth Circuit provides. Highly deferential to the president. It's not even entirely clear how a court could ever review this on an expedited basis, such that they could, I mean, if it's that deferential, seems exceedingly unlikely that plaintiffs are ever going to win. So even, and you can tell by some of the words here by Breyer, even under that highly deferential standard of review, he doesn't like this. Plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits. At the motion hearing, defendant asserted that even if the court can review a federalization order after the initial federalization, it should apply an even more deferential standard of review. No support for that position. So again, just making shit up and saying, but if you can review it, you have to give us even more deference. What the fuck? How could you get more deferential than this, right? Look at how deferential it already is. We're just looking for whether it's colorable and honest. I mean, how do you get more deferential? Okay, it can be dishonest. It can be dishonest and frivolous. Like, these guys have no shame. The test is already almost maximally deferential to the executive branch and the president's determinations. And they want it even more based on nothing, right? They don't say any authority for the position that a review of a further federalization ought be given an even more deferential standard, whatever that would be. Section 12406 provides that the president may call units of the National Guard whenever one of the three preconditions is met. We all looked at the invasion. They haven't even argued that, even though they claim that there's an invasion by Venezuela into our shores. That's the basis of the Alien Enemies Act invocation. There's a rebellion or danger of rebellion against the authority of the government. They don't really vigorously argue that. This is the main one, this sub 3. Of those three preconditions to federalization, defendants only truly advance one. Defendants do not argue there was a foreign invasion or danger thereof that justified federalization, and they only make passing reference in their briefing and perfunctorily asserted at the motion hearing that there was a rebellion or danger thereof in LA that justified federalization. But the suggestion that there was any danger of a rebellion was even more far-fetched in August and October than it was in June when this court first rejected it. And understand that the Ninth Circuit did not address the rebellion argument. They only addressed the inability to execute the laws, right? So if you thought that there was a danger of a rebellion in June where we rejected it, surely there's a less evidence for that precondition now. As the court explained then, while defendants have pointed to several instances of violence, they have not identified a violent, armed, organized, open, and avowed uprising against the government as a whole. Moreover, the court is troubled by the implication that protests against the federal government, a core civil liberty, can justify a finding of rebellion. Other courts in recent months have reached a similar understanding. This is the Seventh Circuit opinion. We have the Portland opinion. Defendants point to no evidence that the scattered protesters in LA in August or October were organized, collectively armed, determined to overtake the federal government. Accordingly, the court turns to the remaining precondition of federalization, and the one upon which defendants primarily rely, that the president is unable to, with the regular forces, to execute the laws of the United States. Defendants fail to satisfy two different requirements, is unable and regular forces. And this is, I kind of alluded to it a little bit, that I felt that this decision is also a little humble, because when you see the regular forces thing here, the court actually missed. Breyer didn't have the argument that the regular forces doesn't mean what most people would think it means today, right? If you take an originalist perspective, what matters for interpreting constitutional or any text is to look at the public meaning. This is the main version of originalism. Not that there aren't others. There are other forms of originalism, but the academic, most widely taken up, prevailing view on originalism is original public meaning. That you take the words as they were understood at the time they were enacted. That's Scalia. That is the dogma, right? And so that's what we have been forced to deal with. That is like everything is the original public meaning of the text, okay? And they didn't run that analysis for regular forces, but someone did. The court in Illinois did. First, the court turns to the requirement that the president is unable to execute federal laws. The Ninth Circuit has already defined unable in this context, holding that unable to execute the laws does not actually mean not able to execute the laws. This is what we call snark, all right? You want to talk about snark? This is snark. The underline here is dripping with lack of satisfaction with the Ninth Circuit panel decision, as I am, right? So he's basically saying, the Ninth Circuit said unable doesn't mean not able. And the underline, I think, suggests strongly that Breyer continues to hold that that's insane, as I do. Rejecting the notion that Section 12406 requires that the president be completely precluded. Footnote 18. To be clear, in granting the TRO, this court held that President Trump had not been unable to execute the laws because ICE had continued to detain and arrest people despite the protests. Defendants provided no support for their argument that ICE could have detained more people in the absence of protests. The statute said unable to execute the laws and not faces obstacles that causes him to underperform in executing the laws, and defendants showing compared unfavorably to the Postal Service strike when the mail system was paralyzed. So Breyer is still fighting the good fight, relitigating the decision that the Ninth Circuit made, the panel, that is. And I commend him for it. That decision is fucking stupid. But it's to no avail. He's basically saying, your argument on this sucked dick, and the Ninth Circuit was stupid. Rather, the circuit held it is enough that the president be significantly impeded in executing the laws. But also he includes but C. So he's saying, hey, well, just wait, right? So Breyer, I can tell. This is like, he has taken so many shots at the Ninth Circuit panel in their TRO thing. And so he includes a but C site. Newsom v. Trump, the Judge Berzon, regarding the denial of hearing in bank, but 12406 sub 3 says nothing about interference or significant impediments. It requires the president to be unable. Unable requires something much closer to incapacity. So this is remarkable, right? Breyer, in the course of his opinion on posse comitatus, and still now, right, is arguing Newsom, the case that he already lost, right, where he was reversed. Citing this this statement by one of the Ninth Circuit in bank proceedings. And it's not clear to me that the Ninth Circuit overall is going to accept the test that was sort of indicated in the initial panel decision. And I think Breyer is trying to push at the in-bank Ninth Circuit reject the test that was accepted by the panel. But it is, I think, remarkable and notable, and all the conservatives, y'all should be freaking out. I'm just kidding. But y'all... it is true that Breyer is like, he's not disobeying the panel. He is like very much talking shit about the decision and saying it sucks. Even though he's not literally saying that, it is, if you read between the lines. Chicago TRO as well, they rejected the decision. The court frankly does not agree that significantly impeded is the same thing as unable. It at 35 explained that unable at the time of Section 12406 enactment meant not able. So again, you have so many examples of judges failing to do what they say is the most important thing to do, which is originalism, right? There's no evidence that unable meant significant imposition at the time it was passed. So they just invented this language. Breyer is basically accusing the Ninth Circuit panel of inventing language in the statute that doesn't appear, which I think is true. It is true. The Ninth Circuit also explained that the term significantly impeded, holding that any minimal interference is insufficient. Because invasion and rebellion both involve unusual and extreme exigencies, which would render a president unable to execute some laws, the Ninth Circuit indicated that the third precondition must mean something similarly unusual or extreme, or else it would swallow the first two preconditions, right? It's like, why would you need to have this third precondition if basically anytime there's a danger of invasion or a rebellion that actually occurs, you would basically be able to cite the third one. So you don't want to read the preconditions as swallowing each other, because then it becomes surplusage. It's not the best reading, right? The Ninth Circuit points to, is there something going on with the debate board? What's going on? You guys okay? Sometimes you guys get so uppity and crazy. Is everyone doing all right in the chat? I'm looking at you now, giving you the attention that you crave. You crave this attention. Okay. He's saying I should block him. All right, you guys just behave, all right? Behave. The Ninth Circuit did not address the... So this is my favorite part of the entire opinion. The Ninth Circuit did not address the meaning of the word is. But it does need addressing here, because they seem to be suggesting that is could mean any time in the past. That's Trump's reading of it. As there was no real dispute at the time of the TRO that the protest activity was ongoing, it is clear to this court, however, that the word is conveys the present tense. The word whenever in section 12406 also communicates a temporal limitation to the present moment. I'm telling you that this is not the best use of our time, but we have to do it, unfortunately, because this is what Trump gets us. Citing the Portland decision that emphasizing is, not whether Trump at some point in the past was unable to do so. The Oregon case, that the use of the present tense clearly conveys congressional intent to the present state of affairs at the relevant time. Congress did not say was unable with the regular forces to execute the laws, and for good reason. The preconditions in 12406 are specific exigent circumstances. Presently existing exigent circumstances like an invasion may demand streamlined responses. Citing Black's Law Dictionary, defining exigent circumstances as a situation that demands unusual or immediate action, as when a neighbor breaks through a window. Compared to U.S. v. James Daniel Good Real Property, exigent circumstances justify exceptions to due process requirements of notice and an opportunity to be heard. Past exigent circumstances do not. Defendants reject this emphasis on the present tense, insisting that past experiences necessarily inform an analysis about whether and to what degree continued federalization is appropriate. True enough, but there must be a colorable basis to conclude, based on past events, that there was an ongoing inability. So not rejecting the notion that past events can't be relevant to whether there's an ongoing exigency. But the question is there an ongoing exigency? Not in the past was there. That doesn't determine it. Sure, the past can inform the future. No one denies that. But you need to show a present exigency. Common sense must guide that inquiry. In order to assess the facts, the court must evaluate them holistically. A colorable basis requires evidence linking a past event to a present inability to execute the law, such as the impact of any intervening events or the lack of attenuation to the time of the call-up. It is insufficient to simply point to a past event in and of itself. Next, defendants insist that Section 12406 permits federalization based on mere risk. Defendants asserted to the Ninth Circuit that protests in LA are now less frequent, less violent, generally pose a less significant risk compared to before the Guard was deployed, but that risk has not disappeared entirely. They similarly assert here that there is a continued threat of harm to federal personnel and property. The court shares defendants' concerns about public safety. All citizens in this country deserve to feel safe, and it is a core function of government to ensure that safety. Yet it is also a core right of the people to be able to gather and protest their government and its policies, even when it's provocative and even when it causes inconvenience. Every protest, and indeed any large gathering of people in public, carries risk, however unlikely. But the specter of a protest that is not a current impediment to the president's ability to execute the law becoming a future impediment is not adequate. It is profoundly un-American to suggest that people peacefully exercising their fundamental right to protest constitute a risk justifying the federalization of military forces. Such logic, if accepted, would dangerously water down the precondition for federalization and run headfirst into the First Amendment. So understand what the court is getting at here. That if all you have is, well, there's going to be protests in the future, you're just describing legal conduct which is accepted as a function of being an American, and that by itself cannot be enough to satisfy the precondition of a risk of inability to exercise laws. Regardless, the applicable standard when reviewing a president's decision to federalize National Guard is not whether there are some threats or harms or risks to personnel and property. Those considerations are relevant only insofar as they render the president presently unable to execute the laws. Notably, the first two preconditions for federalization permit a president to call up the National Guard even if there's only a danger The third precondition does not permit federalization when there is a danger that the president will be unable to execute the laws, but requires a present inability to do so. And we think it's applicable. And there's one other part that I want to get to, and then we can call it for the opinion for now. Next, the court turns to the requirement that the president is unable with the regular forces to execute federal laws. And this is what I mean when I think that the court is being humble and acknowledging the limits of what it knew. The Ninth Circuit has not addressed Section 12406.3's use of the term the regular forces. And citing again the judge who made that statement regarding the denial of rehearing on Bank. In addition, this court's order granting a TRO paid the term little attention. So Breyer is acknowledging he didn't really give much attention to the term regular forces. So he's being honest that the court, in issuing its initial TRO, we kind of just ignored the term regular forces. Okay? So I appreciate that honesty. I appreciate that candor. Concluding that in this case, the regular forces were and are still very much on duty as ICE continued to execute the federal immigration laws in LA, notwithstanding the protests, to the extent that this court assumed that the regular forces meant civilian workers or civilian law enforcement, that assumption might have been in error. So the court is acknowledging, judges really think they're God. I appreciate that Breyer is acknowledging that he might have made a mistake here by assuming that regular forces means civilian law enforcement. A review of materials related to the statutory history, not before the court at the time of the TRO, persuasively demonstrates that the regular forces means the regular forces of the military. And so Breyer is now reading the argument from the judge in Illinois and adding it to his list here. So he just hates the Ninth Circuit panel decision. So do I. I think it's honest to go look at the record and say, hey, did we get this wrong? It's not too late to understand what is meant by these terms and to actually apply some legal analysis. When the predecessor to Section 12406 was enacted, regular forces, quote, meant the soldiers and officers regularly enlisted with the Army and Navy as opposed to the militiamen who did not make it their livelihood to serve the country, but instead took up arms only when called forth in times of national emergency. Ooh, buddy. That originalism coming back to bite you in the ass. Now, they might have the last laugh because the fucking Supreme Court doesn't give a shit about anything. But understand that is a strict originalist reading. What is meant by this term? As Professor Martin Lederman of Georgetown Law explained in December of 1901, President Roosevelt implored Congress to establish a means by which the state's militia could be enhanced and effectively called into service. Congress responded to Roosevelt's appeal by passing the Dick Act, love that, which among other things sought to establish closer relations and better cooperation between the National Guard and the regular Army. When Congress amended the Dick Act in 1908, it was to ensure that in cases where the use of the regular forces was inadequate, the president would have to call up the National Guard as the initial supplement to the standing army before deploying any volunteer units. The effect of the law was to prescribe the National Guard as the second line of defense, as a supplement to the regular army. Professor Lederman recounted plentiful resources to regulars and the regular army in the congressional reports surrounding the 1903 and 1908 legislation and in the over 100 years leading up to it. He concluded that whenever anyone in one of the three branches discussed the regular forces in relation to the militia, the National Guard, or the volunteer forces, they were referring to the person serving within the standing U.S. Army military, particularly the Army. Indeed, he asserted that he was unaware of any counterexamples. Unsurprisingly, when asked at the motion hearing whether there is any historical basis for believing that in 1908, regular forces meant anything other than the standing army, defendants were unable to point to any. Defendants argued and said that they believe that the context of Section 12406 sub 3, that regular forces meant the authorities normally charged with executing the laws. That reading would be more persuasive if the courts interpreted statutory language in a vacuum. Here, the statutory history makes Congress's intent clear. This court finds this historical review persuasive on the meaning of, quote, the regular forces. But this court is also well aware that the Supreme Court will soon rule on this issue and will have the last word. Accordingly, the court will apply both the military meaning of the regular forces and the court's earlier understanding of that term. So, understand that, again, the Supreme Court is going to deal with what the term regular forces means, and they're currently having briefing on that right now. And I can't wait to see the hoops that the court is going to jump through to justify regular forces, given all the historical evidence about what that meant at the time, that it actually means ICE. Like, aren't you guys in agreement? We can't fucking wait for the Supreme Court to come out some bullshit about why this means ICE. contrary to all of the textual history here, contrary to its overwhelming usage in a military and congressional sense. Can't wait for that shit. I wonder what they'll do. Anyway, folks, the rest of it is kind of like, baked in. Even under the deferential standard imposed by the Ninth Circuit panel, which hopefully soon will be revisited, Trump fails. Shit has gotten less intense in terms of those protests since the summer. They just have. And there is no indication that they're unable to enforce their ICE laws the way they want to. That they're, facing significant impositions by these protesters that they're claiming are doing it based on sporadic and infrequent protests on ICE things that are lawful in nature. Nothing. And likewise, even though the court here is going to make, apply the analysis both in terms of the military and in terms of the regular civilian law enforcement, it follows kind of naturally from the facts and even the deferential standard imposed by the Ninth Circuit that there's no reason for the National Guard to continue to be federalized. Additionally, given the fact that they're sending the National Guard out to different states, oh, so you really need them here for this shit, but then why are you sending them out to other places? So this whole thing, to bring it home, is just a pack of lies. This whole reason we have the National Guard deployed are a bunch of lies. A bunch of lies that ICE is being significantly, currently, right, prevented from, even at the time that they were doing this, they were able to execute their warrants. I mean, that's what everyone's complaining about. They were able to enforce the law the way they wanted to, and any failure is on them. Was there law breaking by lefty fucking protesters? Yeah, I'm sure. But certainly now, there is just no reason to think that the circumstances justify continued federalization of the National Guard. But we'll see how the shit plays out. Any questions? So that's all I really want to cover. There's more here, but those are the basic things. I think it's a sick opinion. I think Breyer is doing a commendable job. I think the panel really screwed him over, and they should revisit it because they got things clearly wrong from a historical perspective, and they're just rewriting the statute. Hell yeah. All right, folks. Tomorrow, no stream. I gotta take a train, go to a place. But we should be back either Friday or Saturday. At Saturday at one of these people who are accusing me of being a hypocrite because I don't cover every lawsuit, and indeed don't cover particular lawsuits. We'll get into it. Made a huge thread about how I'm a hypocrite, but the person has literally 2 IQ, and we're going to talk to that person on Saturday at 2. If they don't chicken the fuck out. Great stream. My intellectual chats enhance this for everyone. Appreciate you. Make the stream longer to compensate. I might come back later. I have to go right now. But I might also have to catch a train. Maybe I'll open up a Twitter space or something while I'm on the road. Not when I'm literally in the train. All right, guys. I'm not that kind of guy. I know that Rob Noor. There was one time when Rob Noor, I clipped him saying yeah, I'm a hypocrite. I'm a fucking hypocrite. He's like, Pisco, come on stream right now. I was on a train in the quiet car. I can't do that, bro. That person is yeah, I mean, it just, it is so gratifying to see all your best ops be complete numbskulls. By best here, I just mean, prominent ops have no sense of anything. Oh, you're a hypocrite because you cover one lawsuit and not another lawsuit. What's the actual argument that I'm a hypocrite? And they're literally if you don't cover this, if you don't cover all the law, if you don't cover every lawsuit, even when I have good reasons not to cover a particular lawsuit, then I'm a hypocrite. Why, actually? New York IRL Pisco stream. I'm thinking my lease is coming up for renewal, and I, I might want to move to the boroughs, but I never want to be far away from the city. But I have like people, all the people I know are like sprawling out. Maybe that's just a function of me getting older. But I'm considering going to the boroughs. But then, you're just subway away. The boroughs, Manhattan, elitist. Manhattan's the best, man. It's sick. What can I say? All right, folks. Staten Island, no, not there. It would be like Queens or Brooklyn. Queens or Brooklyn, probably. I was thinking also maybe taking like, if he'll have me. I don't know if he'll have me. Of like going, don't want to say this. Maybe like going for like a few weeks to go do some content with Josiah, or go to Cali and check in on my boy Hutch. And I haven't asked him this, so don't like. I'm thinking like maybe take some time, go like, because I don't really travel past the East Coast unless I'm doing something for like family or friends or something, But I think like when rent being what it is, it's like I live in a sick city. I want to spend time in the city being here, right? But if I just like have that little window before like I plant my roots in the boroughs, maybe, who the fuck knows? Anyway, go see Josiah, chill with the homies. Yeah. Go to Thailand and pick up a breeder visa. Crazy. What's Mike Pence doing these days? Maybe we could do some content with Mike Pence. You think he'd let me? Or Soy Pill? I just feel like it'd be cool. But yeah, I'll let you guys know. Much love. I gotta go. I might be back later today. If not, maybe I'll do a Twitter space. And if not that either, might be able to do a late stream. But I gotta go on a train. I would just say in NYC, went for the first time this summer and fell in love. Well, again, my plan is always to stay near, at a bare minimum, East Coast. Family, friends, and all that stuff. And I love New York. Okay, stay cool.